The story begins with a man looking back at his past. After school, he went to work in a big city. For the past 10 years, his daily commute was overshadowed by an overcrowded train. The work required persistence, and the more responsibilities he took on, the longer he stayed in the office. Even on weekends, he rarely had free days, and he began to lose passion for reading his favorite historical novel before sleep. The main character realized that his life had faded and become bland, and his heart longed for that quiet, dear hometown he had left. When he woke up, something had fallen off his hands became tiny, his body shrank, and he looked out the window of a room he did not recognize. He saw a completely unfamiliar world outside. Someone shouted Vanya. It was Till, his maid. She ran into the room, alarmed, and warned him about the danger outside the door. Confused, he asked who she was, but she still did not understand his confusion. He noticed with admiration that the view was incredible, and with a smile said that he came closer because the garden was so enchanting. Till was stunned and confused by his extraordinary vocabulary and impeccable pronunciation, and the fact that he was only 2 years old made it even more amazing. Even more shocking was that Van, who was almost 30, now found himself in the body of a baby. Once he was a tired office worker crammed into a tiny city apartment. Now he had a new body, and a Maidan neither of them belonged to him. He was confused and could not understand whether he was reborn or had died after all. Strangely, he retained memories of this new life. He confirmed to Tella that she was his personal maid, and she agreed. And he knew for sure his name was Van Ifaro. Until proudly boasted of his cleverness, he named his family his father, Duke Alpafaro, and his elder brothers Mercia Yard and Sesto. But one thing tormented him: he had no idea where he was. In the dining room, Pharaoh's family sat at the table to eat. Father is Duke Jalpa Pharaoh, head of the family. The eldest son is Mercia Pharaoh, the second is Yard Hyde, the third is Sesto, and while they quietly ate, Vana was surrounded by maids. He enchanted them by how neatly he ate his vegetables. It instantly threw him back to those nights when he was a VIP in a hostess bar. He still preserved memories of his past life in Japan, even before he woke up in this world. Although all this seemed unreal and confusing to him, he decided to make full use of it. His brother Yard looked worried. Their father Jalpa asked Yard what he had learned that day. At dinner, Jalpa always asked his sons about how their day had gone, such a usual thing in their home. Van wondered if it was typical for noble families. In the morning, adults kept to themselves and lazed about, and during the day the boys trained with swords and learned what was appropriate for their age. Then Jalpa, genuinely interested, asked Sesto how his day had gone. When he heard from him, he turned to Van and asked what he was going to do. Van thought carefully and said that, since he knew so little, he would study the history and culture of this country. The room fell silent, everyone was quiet, even you. At first Jalpa was so surprised that she could not respond. Jalpa laughed heartily, proud of the cleverness of his youngest son, although he was spoiled by his mother Marora. Jalpa was convinced that Van had inherited his powerful fire magic, and Marora was eagerly awaiting her coming-of-age ritual at 8 years old. In this world filled with magic, knowing your affinity and its purpose was vital. Noble families honor the four elements: fire, water, air, and earth. They use them to attack, protect family and home, or heal, and those with rare talents are met with disdain. His father and brothers possessed all four elemental magics, but Van thought differently. Any magic can be valuable if you know how to use it. The Pharaoh family was noble and known for its military strength and a large country that lived by war. They were very proud of fire magic, which was powerful in battles. The world resembled the Middle Ages and early modern period, but magic made life easier. If gunpowder began to spread, it would cause great problems. Common weapons, swords, spears, and bows were in use, but magic decided everything. In this world, there were 3 continents and countless islands, and Van found himself in a large state in the south of the western continent GR, called the Kingdom of Scuderia. The royal dynasty had ruled there for 300 years and was slowly expanding its possessions, and the then king personally led the warrior nobles, attacking smaller states and taking their lands. As if because of this, even Van's father rose from count to duke. Van asked Hill if there was only one port for ships here, because sailing the open sea meant the risk of attacks by giant monsters, and although passing through the narrow strait was difficult, it was safer. He will say that besides humans, there were elves, dwarves, and beast folk, but they kept to their rural customs, so seeing them was rare. The maids were shocked. Van's questions were so confusing that they were hard to understand. One even asked if he wanted to take a nap, but he said he was just asking out of curiosity and checking if they were tired. They said they were fine. Van did not tire of asking about magical tools, and Hill explained that certain stones, minerals, and crystals could accumulate magical power, and from them create tools that worked depending on magical abilities. Having learned this, Van decided to later ask Hill his big question about the gifted. A 49-year-old butler named Vesparta arrived and asked Van how much he remembered. Van was only 2 years old, but he already knew the basic letters and numbers. Sparta had served Van's father for years and had seen his skill many times, but Van himself had never spoken a word with him before. He was nervous and covered in sweat, barely finding words to answer. Sparta asked again what Van still remembered. Van said, "Ask, I still can't write." Sparta tested him with a simple question. "What is 2 plus 3? Van answered correctly. Then Sparta asked to subtract 2 from 7, and Van again gave the correct answer. After a short silence, Sparta said that from now on he himself would teach Van twice a week. For Van, this was a real torment. The lessons were far above the level of a 2-year-old child, and there were too many of them to learn everything. Sparta could not hide her surprise. How intelligent this 2-year-old turned out to be. Van already knew how to read and write, and was studying things like the nobility system, land unification, and rules. Yet Van wondered what a 2-year-old child was supposed to do at all. During those 2 years, he was constantly learning. He held a wooden stick to practice swordsmanship. Fencing with Till in the tatami room was like a game. Another maid got angry. She hit Van and suggested punishing her. The idea sounded fun, but Till was worried. Usually such things were serious. Van just lightly tapped her on the forehead. Although he had been training for only half a year, practicing sword techniques daily, at 5 years old he could already fight older students called young warriors, and won simply by striking first with the stick. He loved it and became wildly passionate. He weaves judo and karate techniques into sword movements, and opponents simply cannot withstand it. Their opponents were still children, so the attacks were simple and repetitive. They lacked the skill and experience to defeat Van. Unlike his brother, who sat in the courtyard in Chesto, Van also talked with ordinary people, who seemed to enjoy being around him. Deputy Chief D eagerly wanted to examine Van's hands. He looked closely. Van's skin was neither rough nor peeling. His hands were smooth, nails grown out. Van did not understand why D was inspecting them so carefully, and said that although he supposedly trained every night, it was not visible on his hands. He explained that he did not train at night due to a lot of studying, and devoted his free days to training and the pleasure of wielding a sword. D learned that Sparta recently tripled Van's study load. Now Van understood why he had accumulated so many lessons. De Grue was delighted and eager to personally teach Van swordsmanship. He insisted that Van focus on swordsmanship, noted his natural talent, and offered to train him, adapting to his physique. Debian, proud and full of enthusiasm, strives to make Van the best swordsman in the kingdom. Seeing those sincere looks, Van explained that he loves both books and blades, and strives to become skilled in both. Dai could not persuade him, so eventually agreed to fulfill his wish. Van asked for gentle advice, but it was quite the opposite. He was driven to exhaustion without any respite. Even when Van tried to rest, Dai still ordered him to squat down. At first he thought D was cruel, but after that remark considered him a foolish boor. Till came and praised Van for his daily efforts, although it was difficult after rebirth. Each day brought him joy he had never felt before in his previous life. He finally felt the fullness he had previously lacked. Now he flourished in a magnificent, noble family. He promised himself to fully enjoy this wonderful life. 3 years passed, and everyone had long called him a wunderkind. Then the man swung his sword at Van, threatening once again to put an end to his carefree life. History suddenly throws us back. Vanu is 6 years old. That was 2 years ago. He vividly remembered the day on the street. At home, everything buzzed with all kinds of people, and he looked at them as if they never aged. 6 years that Van Mew spent here dragged on almost like 30 on Earth. The memories remained intact. In this life, he was born again as the 4th son of a noble family, whom everyone hailed as a genius. Daily sword training was brutal, like torture. Even 12-year-old child soldiers could not stand against 6-year-old Venom, grasped skills like an adult, and it was astonishing. His faithful servant enthusiastically said that Till handles the sword so skillfully, as if a born genius, and that he could compete with the brothers and become the head of the family. Here the weak lost to the strong, the harshest was supposed to rule, but Van's path this time was completely different. Wealth, title, respect, and power went to the head of the family, so when his talented relatives went ahead, he considered assassination attempts in aristocratic circles a commonplace, a quick way to rise. Fortunately, Van was not close with his brother. Knew they would kill him without hesitation, and even if he did not chase leadership, too bright a shine could cost him his life, so a peaceful life was out of the question. Till suggested going out to play, and he suddenly stopped being a wonderkind, just became a child. At first, he decided to behave carefully. They started with shopping, then visited Murray Company, a huge firm with outlets all over the kingdom. He talked and talked until it started to remind him of the scales at Costco. Suddenly a man approached, dragging a child with tied hands and shouting at him. The child was in torn rags, and Van looked embarrassed at the scene. The man, tightly gripping the rope, told the spectators that this was not a performance. He stated that he had full rights over his son and justified himself. Allegedly, the boy's debt forced him to sell the child into slavery. In this world, slavery laws allowed only two types: those doomed to death and those punished for crimes. But once poor families sold children into slavery whom they could not feed, just to survive somehow. The father explained that he used his son to pay off debts, turning him into a debt slave. Van understood why he could not take his eyes off or say a single word. Here slavery was common, for him a rotten system, and people did not even blink. A woman noticed Van and asked if he was the king's son, the very celebrated wunderkind. She introduced herself as Rosalie, thanked him for coming, confirmed that he was the very Van they talked about, and greeted you. She offered to keep him company and bring everything he desired. Van asked how much the enslaved boy cost. Rosalie guessed he was about 8 and asked the father about his magic. The father indignantly said it was theft. She valued him at no more than 3 large silver coins. The father sharply commanded, insisting that slaves buy from shops for 5 silver or more because, he said, these things last longer and should cost more. Rosalie countered, shops buy for less than half the selling price. For this boy they gave only 3 coins. Dim-witted men were less useful than women, considering maintenance costs. When the father was boiling with rage, Van intervened and asked him to restrain himself, calm down, and be gentle with your son if he is really yours. The father said to Van sternly, shut up and don't stick your nose into other people's business. Rosalie got angry, called the father a fool, and said they didn't need to buy the boy. She asked if he would sell him even if he lied to his son. The father claimed everyone had deceived him and that he wouldn't sell to her at all. He dragged his son to another shop. The boy trembled with lips pressed tight from pain, and suddenly Van stopped them sharply, extending 5 silver coins to buy him. He remained calm, feeling that if he did not act the child might die. The father demanded money, until said she only had gold coins. He told her to rearrange them inside, and promised to handle everything himself. Meanwhile, Rosalie gave the money to the father, and Van, without looking away, asked the boy if he was okay and if he could stand. He introduced himself as Van, and learned that the boy's name was Cayman. Van whispered that he was not free and could not go anywhere. Till suspected that Van had bought him as a slave, but Van actually just wanted to save him. Till was worried about the microtalia father, and Van insisted that leaving Cayman alone on the road would be risky, especially since Cayman knew little, and Van could not abandon him. He asked Cayman if he had anywhere to go. Cayman was silent at first, then asked to come to Van's house and said he could help with various tasks. Another boy warned Van, the king will not allow a stranger child into the estate unless she is given into slavery. Van asked Cayman if he agreed to this. Cayman responded with an affirmative nod. Van suggested first looking at clothes. He wants them to look stylish together from now on. Rosalie noted that first a contract for killing was needed. She took Cayman by the hand, and a mark appeared on his hand. The contract mark on the sled, a unique mark on the sleeves, unless it is cancelled. As a contract sorceress, she waved her hand and forgave the fee for Venza's first visit. Then they said thank you to her. Rosalia was stunned by this. She was not used to gratitude from the nobility, and then carefully led them further. At first Rosalia asked Van if he wanted to choose clothes for Cayman, and Van, grabbing him by the hand, impatiently called him to join the shopping for new outfits. That request somewhat overwhelmed him. They went to the store, and Van took him to a pleasant department. Van chose one side and did not expect those things to feel so strange to the touch. But Rosalie explained that they were made from quality fabric, and then pointed to another outfit, the one usually worn by slaves. Van quickly said that he did not look at him that way, and thought that the outfit he chose suited Cayman very well. Then he added that he would also buy underwear and shoes. Rosalia appreciated this and noted that there were wonderful shoes for the outfit, and Van recalled that day and realized it was his first outing. When he bought a slave and thought that now everything would be fine. Suddenly a van pulled up from it. They said that Deputy Commander D was looking for him. Then the van offered him a cookie and asked him to say that he was not here. Cayman, suspecting that the commander might already know, still ate the cookie. Then they noticed that Cayman was without gloves. Cayman himself waved it off, he did not need them, and Van wondered if it bothered him that people were staring intently at his hands. He replied that it was a sign of their connection, and it had to be visible. Van objected that such things should not be flaunted, and bought gloves for him. Cayman immediately put them on and promised Van Hyde that he would wear them because he was the one who gave them to him. Cayman turned to the Deputy Commander D and said that Van, it seems, was not there. The commander went pale. Witnesses had seen him enter that room earlier. Cayman suggested it might just be an illusion due to his deep attachment to Van. Then the deputy commander shouted, asking why Cameron still had food in his mouth, but it was no longer there. He reproached Cayman, saying that he brazenly ignored the orders of the deputy commander. Cayman, however, said that he belonged to Van as his slave. The deputy commander repeated once again that Cayman had toughened up and ordered him to take Van's place. He told Cayman that the commander would teach him and that he should be proud. Eavesdropping secretly, Van felt pity for Cayman. He thought that Cayman really loves to loaf around. He felt there should be some benefit in descending from the level of a genius to an ordinary guy. He decided that if Cayman gave up, he would take his place. Watching Cayman and Deputy Commander walk away. In the next chapter, people were chatting about Van's 8th birthday. It was time for his magic evaluation ceremony, and everyone was eagerly rejoicing because he was a true talent. The sons of Pharaoh had magic connected with the 4 elements fire and wind, so they were confident that Van would suit fire magic too. But at the ceremony, Van did not have elemental combination. Instead, he had creation magic. Those who possessed this power, so-called alchemy, were considered the most unfortunate mages. One had to gather iron and copper, imagine the object in the mind, and forge swords or jewelry, but this drained a lot of magical energy and greatly limited what could be created. Spending a lot of magic on creating weapons and trinkets could be done by others with different magic. Inventors and blacksmiths did not need magical skills for this at all. Vienna's life was not threatened by brothers and family power struggles. He deliberately lowered his status for 2 years, and the low rank could not change his type of magic. Nobles valued the 4 elements fire, water, wind, and earth, and in the Pharaoh family, those with strong fire or healing magic were especially esteemed. The eldest son Myra had wind magic, worked harder than anyone, and was the deputy head of the family, yet the second and third sons with fire magic looked down on him. Among the nobility, magic was valued as much as gold. Jalpa, Van's father, simply could not believe that his son was a user of creation magic, since both he and his wife possessed powerful fire magic. Van's mother, despite her powerful magic, weakened and died after his birth, which ignited great hopes in Jalpa for him. Jalpa drew his sword and, smiling slightly, said that Van had strange abilities since childhood, and admitted he had been naive in expecting much from him. So he loudly declared that the Duke's family could not be restrained. He wanted to keep this secret, and insisted that to do so, he would have to kill Van. Van froze, not knowing how to react, but Myra, the eldest son, rushed forward, covering him, and when Yard asked what was happening, Myra explained that he controlled part of the Duke's lands that no one had touched yet. There was also a distant village in that region. He proposed to give that plot to Van. That was the land of Maragain. It was there he became Duke, and it was there Count Ferdinand, whose own land had shrunk, sent knights to court. So giving the village to Van, even if a knight stands near Count Ferdinand, will not cause problems, and in the recently acquired lands, loyalty to the Duke's family still smoldered, so settling someone from their own there, even for show, would help. Yard liked this plan. He decided that Van would remain in that village as its lord. He told him to leave as soon as he was ready, and praising Mira for proving his worth, he set off. Immediately, Marin knelt before Van and said, "Sorry." He hated seeing his younger brother struggle with creation magic. Father and brothers always treated him badly because of his victory magic. He wouldn't care if Fant got offended at him for suggesting such a difficult idea. Van did not hate him at all. Myra saved him. Otherwise, death or captivity awaited him. They could have cut out his tongue, and most likely, he would have become a slave. In this difficult moment, he vowed not to waste the chance Myra gave him. Mira was constantly impressed by Van's sharp mind and often wondered where he learned such impressive words. He believed that Van understood matters more deeply than he did. From the very beginning in Espart, and until the moment when love began to tell about Van's successes and progress. The Duke's family decided to send Van to the most remote corner. Everyone knew it would not be easy. Yet Van was ready to give all his strength to this, and Mara said she did not mind if it helped Van. They firmly shook hands, and Van sincerely thanked his brother. At home, Till was boiling with rage, and passionately said that even without magic, Van was a smart and respected nobleman. She thought that sending him to a distant village was foolish, but the role of a feudal lord also had its charm. When the Silence Order was introduced, Van relied on her, grateful for her support, and admitted that he was looking forward to this new rural life. What an unexpected story. Van realized that recalling the chasm between ordinary life and noble rules meant, now he could call himself free. If he took on the duties of a feudal lord in a small village, he would probably have a sea of free time, and he would start wondering how to spend it. Remembering the pain of being abandoned by his father and brothers, he decided to create a happy haven in the village, a place where everyone could live well and rejoice. In the next chapter, the nobles sprinkle pompous words to feed their pride, but in reality, they think only about their own salvation, not the kingdom even if this harms the safety of their people. In short, nobles often despise commoners and adventurers even more so. In this chapter, the group passionately argues about their job, protecting a noble child. Since things did not work out with the royal family, they had to take it. The biggest of them asked why he agreed, and he replied that he had no other choice. Van entered briskly, smiled sincerely, and introduced himself. Ordo, who seemed to lead the group, was impressed by his charisma and politely greeted him in response. Van began showering Ordo with compliments, noticing his heavy, bulky weapon. The rest of the adventure team looked at Van with curiosity and sincere admiration. Having greeted everyone, Van left, leaving behind a warm, pleasant impression. They liked him very much, a typical sweet boy they were supposed to protect, but Ordo immediately warned, do not mess with his hair. At the same time, Van stood next to Cayman and was preparing to set off on the road. He ordered him to pack the bags into 3 horse-drawn carts, saying that the escort could not use the night army wagons, so Mira hired adventurers instead. Initially, they planned to send only 1 cart for him, but Mira insisted there be more. Hill also went with them. She was ready to serve Van wherever he went, so she followed. Only a few people knew that he had magic beyond the 4 main elements, but the rumors did not stop. He also came and swore that he would deal with anyone who stood in Van's way. Then he asked if it was possible to request a night army escort, but even D was not sure. He was urging the group to speed up preparations. Esparta came and said it was a bit early for Jalpa, but soon he left. All his children were already grown, so he joined Van outside the city without hesitation to relax a bit. Sparta had served alongside his father for years, so letting him go was extremely difficult, and finding another such devoted assistant was almost impossible. But Esparta will still monitor Van's training when he retires. It worried him a little. Van noticed that everyone packed their things to the brim, as if they were not going to the village, but he felt grateful for their support. They brought energy, and Esparta gave great wisdom. Hill noticed Van's strange smile and asked if something was wrong. Van, with a light, usual smile, said he was just happy that everyone would come and thank them. Till shared that many maids like her wanted to join, but only she was allowed after she begged Miro. She said that Mira was often busy and rarely chatted with the maids. Yard and Sesto treated them badly, but the wagons somehow stood out. He greets them every day, treats them with sweets, and even helps during cleaning. The mage who trained with swords also adored Van. Embarrassed, Van told Cayman that he could stay in the kingdom if he didn't like it here. The deal with Slade could be changed or terminated, and Miro would quickly agree. Cameron said he decided to serve Van all his life. Van was confused and jokingly asked if he loved him that much. But Cameron sincerely admitted that he both liked him and admired him. It's time to go. Van felt that his father wanted him to leave quietly so that no trace of him would remain. He lived in that town for 2 years, but now it was empty. When they were about to leave, a girl ran up to Van and called him. He recognized her immediately, the guard's daughter, whom he had seen several times. She asked if he was going somewhere, and he wondered in surprise where she had heard that. Then she pointed, and Van saw a man with horses behind them. This stunned and embarrassed him. The soldier said that by order of D, they did not want Van to run away like a fugitive, and at least wanted to say a proper goodbye, and added that D was dozing in the carriage and would inform him as soon as that woman was killed. He woke up, then passed out again, shouting that Van, the 4th prince of the kingdom, was here. He ordered a mantle to be prepared for him and declared that he would deal with any officer who asked for permission himself. People gathered around Van, asked where he was going, begged him to return soon, and guessed whether he had gone to study in the royal capital. Then say goodbye to them, be surprised at how much they seemed to care. Meanwhile, Tilgruder began to sob. A man approached Van and said that the beef barbecue was ready. Van realized that they would have to pass through 2 cities, but first they stopped and camped for the first time. He remembered how in his past life he lived in a car, but this was his first night in a dangerous world teeming with monsters. For this trip, he hired 2 teams of adventurers to guard him. The man with the sheet, beef barbecue ortho sheet, looked like the leader, a true professional with over 20 years of experience. He handled clients without any problems, even the 8-year-old Leg Van, whom he considered capable of speaking firmly. Van sincerely thanked for the beef and for Ordo's care, then gently suggested he take some rest. Tell everyone, even adventurers, noticed Van's generosity. She imagined if Van were her master, they would discuss another 100 wonderful topics. Then he pondered, after leaving the town and passing by 2 more cities, he would no longer be able to do this again and again. He went over in his mind everything they had encountered. They still had to visit 4 cities, some large, some small, stopping for a full day in each, and he noticed that because of the heavy suitcases they were moving slowly. In 2 weeks they covered 50,100 kilometers daily already, between 500 and 1,000. The kingdom was huge, and in Japan it would be like crossing 3 or 4 prefectures, although he was not sure about the exact distance. Till informed Van that they would soon reach the village. Finally, Van thought that everything here looked more like a workplace where a new manager had arrived. First impressions matter. While he was thinking, the carriage stopped at the city entrance, and Van asked what had happened, and the man, firmly holding the horse's bridle, said that the village was in trouble, was being attacked. Then the brave ones entered, and before forming a circle, argued about their next move, trying to develop a strategy. Someone suggested that they might be bandits or fleeing mercenaries. Another noted that anyone who is afraid or doubtful can retreat, and yet another assured that he was ready to fight. The village was hidden behind strong, thick wooden walseros, barely penetrated them. Soldiers in armor guarded the gates, and behind them stood a group of mages. The peasants only hid, like turtles in their shells, begged Van to allow them to fight and insisted, as he said that teamwork could defeat the enemy. Van estimated the enemies at about 40–50 people and hesitated whether to engage in battle, not knowing the nature of the opponent. Arthur Schitt said it was too risky. Dai admitted that he knew this and that there could be injuries or even deaths, but everyone would cope with it. Arthur added that he had his own rules. They do not take tasks that require sacrifices of teenagers, and he told Dai that as an adventurer, he probably often had to face such moments. The author replied that risking everyone's lives would have killed them long ago. To ask the group if anyone was ready to put their life on the line, said that the village and its people are now the first possession of his lord, and when a crisis comes, he cannot stand it. His hand reaches for the sword by itself. Ordo told Dai that he was a good knight, but this did not concern them. He added that even extra pay did not matter if he died. At least he liked guarding Van, and that depending on the circumstances, they could accompany them. The bard rejected this, and the same D would gladly give his life for others. He claimed that D could handle more than 30 enemies, even mages, and that the fight would be even. He said that if D fell now, the village would be left without a leader, and they would not fight even if he died first. As already said, he was still a mage of the 4 elements. He said that the open space would reveal their combat power. Orda froze in shock that he could fight, and everyone was told not to take risks. At first, he raised a barrier wall, and the adventurers attacked from behind it at a distance. As soon as the enemies looked that way, that was his tactic. Repeated sudden attacks increased their chances of victory. Arthur asked if magical attacks could be repelled. He doubted that anything except arrows could stop them. Van explained that one map had iron reinforcements in key places, so one could get inside and slip out after the first unexpected strike, and added that their sole lane was to first confuse the enemy. He asked if Esparta would stay behind and meet them. Esparta agreed as bait he would fight from behind the wall, because otherwise D and the others would die. Van immediately felt disgust at Sparta's words. It seemed to him that they foretold inevitable trouble. Sparta finally insisted that he and that old man would be more useful. He begs Van, "Allow me to take the risk, don't make yourself the bait." Everyone turned back to Van and eagerly awaited his decision. Dill stepped forward, blocked Van's way, and resolutely refused, saying outright that she would not let that happen. If Van was to be the bait, she would rather challenge the enemies herself, because she was confident. If they attacked, her victory would be hers. Cayman intervened and said that he was joining as well. Van shouted sharply at everyone again, "Listen." Then he decisively declared that he was the leader there. He said he would consider that option. Ordo with his people could escort him to the village, but that did not mean he intended to fight to save him. He told Esparta, a man who had withdrawn from affairs in a noble house, that he had done so much for Van's family and did not deserve to die there. He said coldly that D and the Nike squad served his father, not him, and if they suffered, he must apologize to his father. He looked at Till and said he considered her an older sister who had been by his side longer than anyone, and that he could not bear the loss of such a dear person. Then he turned to Cayman and said he admired his sincerity. Although Cayman was his slave, he did not need to die for him. Then he added that he was glad Cayman was enjoying his life. He thought, for a person like him, branded a coward and an outcast from a noble family, it was incredible and human that people followed him, so he could not allow them to die just because of his orders and doing nothing. He would never become that terrible leader. He had to lead from the front lines and sincerely apologized to them. Van spoke, "I will take the cart and be the first to push it forward," asked everyone to strike from both sides, and reminded that decisive are the long-range attacks here. He said that if the enemy does not retreat, they could flee and leave his body behind. He thought, even if the bandits kill him, as long as his identity remains unknown, he does not care, and Ordo was no longer afraid to take risks. Van called Ordo a child, and threw out that he supposedly said he risked his life for duty. Or the warned wagon, a few more such talks, and he will be forced to reprimand the whole group. Paul confessed that she had been deceived by nobles more than once and that she had only encountered braggarts, while Van, on the other hand, remembered their names by heart. That is why they were ready to stake their lives, she said, and everyone agreed. Meanwhile, Van thought he remembered the name Pyal because she was kind. They said these were the proud knights of the pharaoh's family, knights of service to Van, who was to determine the pharaoh's future. He swore to guard Van there and protect the pharaoh's tomorrow. Spartus said that when the exile ends, he hoped Van would remember his noble duties and obligations. He told Van this will end in 3 days. The wagon felt a thought that stretched endlessly. He said he had adjusted the terrain and implemented his plan, first built a barrier, then struck from afar. Dai and his knights will decisively charge the attack from the left, Ordo with the team from the right. Those who do not fight will stand ready in case of trouble. He shouted understood, and everyone began to execute the plan. As soon as they built the wall, Dai with the knights and Orda with his team were ready to move forward. Orda thought that old Butler was more of a mage than a simple servant. He fought decently as a mage of the 4 elements, and was not just a servant, yet he wondered if in some cases. Refusing the young master's order could have cost him his life, said Ordo. Ordo agreed. He was too valuable. No noble like him should die so young. Ordo admitted, if he could, he would make that boy a lord. He added that over these 2 weeks his view of the nobles had completely changed. It seemed there could be someone like that in the family. He was very interested in Van, said he would rush to help him in any trouble, although Ordo knew little about Van. Lord of a tiny village, and yet it was a hassle. Sometimes he wanted to retreat. He risked his life out of duty, even though he ended up in such a place, and he did it not only for the land and people, but also for the knights, retired butlers, maids, and slaves, because it was the adventurers who taught him to make such plans to protect everyone without losses. But even 8-year-old, Van would risk his life only for himself. For Ordo, Van really was a strange boy, but when he returned, Cayman immediately hugged him, thanking God with relief. Ken decided if Van was in danger, he would first cover him, then follow him wherever he went. Van saw in them a real family and told them that they were in battle, asked them to act if they could help. He decisively ordered, bring medicines and first aid kits from the cart. Paul said he would intervene if it became risky and nothing more. And they shouted Roger before rushing back into battle. The bandits' grip relaxed. Nearby, in neighboring villages and towns, everything was collapsing, and the attack on this small village was almost over. When the bandits were thinking about what to do next after the attack, an arrow hit one of them from behind the wall. Ordo and Dee struck simultaneously. Ordo was even impressed by Dee's skill. Effortlessly wielding a huge sword, he demonstrated. So why was he the deputy knight commander of the pharaoh family? The enemies panicked, they fled, and Ordo ran to chase them. When suddenly he noticed one heading straight towards them, he shouted to stop him, but the shooters couldn't see beyond the wall. He shouted that the enemy was approaching, but it was a bit too late. The poor face to face with a huge enemy. Magic was needed right now, but it required 10 seconds to recharge, and she didn't make it in time. She thought death was inevitable, but Vannon appeared and rushed to help her. She warned them this is not a fight for children, but they did not listen to her and rushed into the attack. After relentless blows, the enemy fell. Ven warned Warren that other enemies might attack there, ordered them to guard the front line, while Paul was meanwhile wondering what was wrong with this boy. Eventually, a few bandits fled, but the attackers were destroyed, no one was hurt, and this turned out to be the best result. Ordo said they would take on the job if they were given half of the client's fee. It was important to him, not only the money he asked, if he could stay there a little longer. The others refused they had work in the next region, because the matter here was finished, and although they would return later, a few still wanted to stay with him. Thick thickets and nearby peaks allowed him to chase demons for some time without quests and even earn a few coins. Paul noticed that Van did not look like a son of a noble family at all, not that appearance, and that was exactly why Ordo stayed nearby. He was curious what such a child would grow into. Van's sharp mind was striking unusual even for noble upbringing. At first she seemed like a noble child, but as soon as he spoke, that image dissipated. He was polite and kind, but often behaved like a lively, warm child, never giving the impression that he looked down on commoners. Ordo admitted he had never seen such a nobleman, and the team only nodded in agreement. They recalled how before the fight Van said that his magic was not suitable for battle, then he was ready to give his life for everyone, and that was an act completely unlike a noble's decision. Paul noticed that Van rushed to save her when she was trapped, and this no longer looked childish. His actions more resembled knights hardened by countless battles. But this boy was not even 10 years old. He was a mystery, overshadowing any noble they knew, and Orda eagerly wanted to see how the land would live under the rule of Van, his lord. He asked his people if they also wanted to see this. Everyone agreed, till annoyed Van, insisting that next time he let Cameron lead. Cannon was plotting plans to become even stronger. Pools stepped forward and apologized for interrupting. She joked that at his age, Van was already making girls cry, and Van replied that he wanted to be honest with her especially because she was important to him. Pavlo wondered, was he an elf their children did not age at all as they seemed. She still did not know how to address him. He was a nobleman, but behaved not at all like a noble. Van said that Till had raised him from diapers and therefore decided he was human. Then she asked where he learned to wield a sword. Nodding to Dai, he said that he personally trained him, although he was not fully grown yet. He was taught to surpass his own abilities. She asked if his cleverness and lightning-fast reaction were from Esparta, and Van answered, yes. Paul says that she owes her life to Van's bravery and his skill with a sword. She was deeply grateful and would always remember this favor. Van Grind said it was no problem at all. Paul thought it would become a problem if it came from noble charm. But here one adventurer won the loyalty of another. Sparta told Van that the peasants were gathering near the gates. It was his first meeting, so he wanted to leave a noticeable mark. And at that very moment, the peasants gathered in a crowd, and Van stepped forward before everyone. He said that Lord Pharaoh had sent him the recent ruler of these lands, including their village, and from now on, he was the one who ruled here. The village elder Rhonda approached and thanked him for saving their village and its people. Van spoke about the local lords and squads that ignored orders, said he intended to defend this village and from now on take matters into his own hands, asked the people to support, and help. Orta thought this was too far-fetched but remained silent. Rhonda warmly invited him to his home as a sign of goodwill. Inside, he said that 6 months ago the village had 150 inhabitants. A month ago bandit attacked, and their number fell to 100, and today the third raid had already passed. Van asked why they had become the main target. He suggested that it might be because of the neighboring border of the Kingdom of Gen. Under Count Ferdinand, the Knights of the Border Guard patrolled it, but with the arrival of the new lord, the border was neglected. In essence, the village suffered, because it now found itself under the rule of Lord Fellow. Van said that the old ruler, Count Ferdinand, had allies in every town. It seemed his father, Lord Fellow, appointed rulers only in large cities, and small villages were simply left to their own devices. Their fate was unknown and forgotten. The tiny village did not need protection and paid almost no taxes. Then promised that from now on you will keep them informed. Talking about graping, crying, or blaming the kingdom was pointless even if someone doubted. Nothing was changing, and Rhonda Gallag's son looked angry after Wen's speech. Van told him to sit down, spoke on behalf of the village, and at the same time thought that with such a fiery temper their future was bleak. Van noticed that King Berlin, the founder of the kingdom, might have left a gap in the laws. Silence lingered after his words, and Spartak cleared his throat as if urging him to speak. Van was a little nervous, but did not back down. He had to lead this village. He said that whining about the kingdom's laws and their consequences would change nothing, because it was in this village that these laws applied. So describe 3 clear, distinct steps. First, they create something so valuable that the kingdom simply could not fail to notice it. Second, they earn money and often hire mercenaries. Third, they themselves restore and develop the village. A woman there said bitterly that they had thought about it too, but in such a lonely corner nothing was simple. Selling firewood or stones would not bring profit, and due to lack of education, it was hard for them to make products of other value. Therefore, they would have to fight with all their might to earn money. Van acknowledged their suffering, but said that now he was here, educated, and would do everything in his power to protect and improve the village. The response was not what he had hoped for, so he could not hold back and intervened, explaining that then, at only 8 years old, he was given land to manage. And for this, many considered him a talented boy. Dai added that his knight leader came to serve them faithfully and wanted to join their group. The peasants, moved and impressed by their words, asked if Van had those 4 elements. But he stopped them, saying that he did not have such skills, so do not count on him in battle. The most important thing for them is to strengthen the walls to keep out the invaders. The fence was strong, but wooden and helpless against fire. Sparta assured that as long as the magic was active, the stone would hold, although later it turned into ordinary earth. Van told him to use stones to reinforce the walls. He was confident that soon they would build a strong barrier. The river would also help by driving away the bandits, so someone suggested taking on this task. He urged the others, set traps and prepare attacks from the wall. Simpler bows, arrows, or stones are needones that peasants can easily use. Van stepped forward and openly told everyone his plan, swearing to work tirelessly so that the village could grow and prosper. He declared, "Although I am young, I have support, and if the enemies come, we will fight back." By the end of the speech, he felt like a true politician. The man raised the issue of taxes. He said they paid 30 of the harvest and monster pelts with teeth. Then he reduced it to 10 and offered to cover any shortfall himself. Peasants froze at his proposal. He insisted that the most important thing was a calm, stable life. Some even sold their children to pay off debts, while others feared that bandits would return soon, so they asked for night guards. But he said the message would arrive in 2 weeks. By then it would be too late for help. They wouldn't come anyway because of the great distance, and the peasants were furious that they had been abandoned. Van felt their disappointment, but said that the big tent currently had no money to hire night guards for such a huge area. Even if they were convinced, there would be too few of them. 200 people were needed. He asked us to build a stone wall behind the wooden fence, and without any hesitation, he set to work on it. The peasants were stunned with amazement. He said that now they needed their help more than ever. If they helped, the village would survive. There was a lack of housing, so they spent the night in a wagon. Rhonda offered his house, but he could not be evicted yet. Then never worry, because you only have production magic. The stain of their contempt still hung over him due to the lack of combat power. He tried to win them over, but they remained aloof. He had to earn their trust so that the village would prosper and life would become joyful. He swore to himself, "I will protect this village and make it a place where people truly want to live." In the next chapter, Van, Esparta, and Rhonda were talking. Van says if the enemy does not attack first, we will strike, best from the walls with arrows and magical bows. Esparta replies that from a low wall this will do little. Rhonda says that once they used to thrust spears through the loopholes of the forest fortress, so do you respond that the enemies are now in a similar position and can be pierced again with spears. Ven threw out the word catapult. Rhonda did not know what it meant. But Sparta clarified this is a siege weapon, not for their defense. He told Rhonda that it throws giant stones, where they will fall no idea, and the reload takes a long time, but still it can smash the fortress walls and watchtowers because the targets are large. Throwing a box with small stones will extend the range, aiming at the gates will increase the force of the strikes, and they also suggested adding bottles of oil and a torch to set the ground on fire and make the attack even fiercer. Intrigued, Esparta asked to invent this device. It turned out that it was Van, although they doubted his creation magic, and he himself never fully understood it to the end. Setting out beyond the city, he freely practiced shaping stone, wood, and metal, and now shows his skills. Instantly, Van looked at Orto and asked, "Do you think we can capture the village now that the opponents have fled?" Orto agreed and said he would stay a little longer to earn some money hunting legendary beasts. He is pawing, sensing monsters nearby. He mourned Van, it could have been risky, so he suggested he rest under the nearest trees. Van admired Orto's talent for noticing and destroying hidden enemies when he wandered. Although talented, he could not raise the level. Kin noticed a giant tree. Van said it was too big to cut down. He pointed to another, but that one was also too big, so Van tested his strength. He could not clearly imagine the shape, so when he resorted to magic, it came out crooked and weak. Creation magic was not easy to control. Focusing on a tiny piece, he thought he could make it as he wanted, and a warm feeling ignited in his stomach and flowed to his fingertips. The image had to be small and precise. He had to imagine even the fibers of the trees, and if he succeeded, they would weave together, forming a tight bond. He realized he succeeded when the fibers tore and merged into one. They turned into a wooden queue. It looked like wood, but in fact it was plastic resembling lips. The fiber block turned out to be incredibly strong. It was stronger than processed wood, so they decided to make many things from such blocks. They will fix everything later when they get to the coach. Poole approached first and asked if he had gathered firewood. It turned out to be lighter and stronger than expected. It refused to break, and Ven pushed him to try to break it to test its strength. Orta Biv blocked again and again, but not a single crack appeared. Van pondered, thinking about what is stronger, stone or this wood, was delighted with such a practical find. Near the carriage, he suddenly realized his magical energy was exhausted to the last drop. Most importantly, he felt that magic became unstable after the fall of the rules, and he looked at his creations for a long time until he was captivated by their exquisite craftsmanship. Van was still trying to decipher how magic works. He needed to imagine the weapon completely, its metal, sharp edges, and shape. He forged a sword and handed it to Cayman. He was such an eccentric that he swore this would become a family treasure. He also forged an axe for Till. Seeing her expression, he wondered if she liked this weapon. He fell exhausted because he put all his strength into making the axe strong and unscratched. Till assured him that she simply adored axes and even pressed herself against him. Van pretended to be convinced and was glad that she liked it, but deep down he knew she did not like it, and he swore next time to make her an ornament himself. He wondered if more magic would give him more strength. He suddenly came up with an unusual way to use it. The next moment, Orda enthusiastically praised Espartha's magical skills, saying he was a worthy mage alongside Van, which slightly lifted Van's spirits because he felt equal to Espartha. Paul, however, considered Espartha strange as such mages were usually recruited into the army or became the best adventurers. Van was simply grateful Sparta stayed with him, even though he was soon to retire, and he cared about Sparta's future as much as about his own past. With tenderness in his heart, he hoped that he would enjoy his later years. Sparta approached and told them that he is growing up, and as a lord, he will have to take on the duties of his title. Van instantly became nervous and said they should focus on strengthening the village's defense, promising to reinforce the gates. When Esparta pulled him along, he stopped and asked how Van planned to do it. They stepped forward and offered to stack the stones. He grumbled that everyone here seemed completely clueless, then clarified he did it using magic. This realized his mistake and said he respects Van. They tried to convince him that one magic would not work, and the gates were wooden, so he would make them like his usual wooden blocks. He was most worried about the weight. The weight decided whether they could cover the enemy. That was their limit now, so next they would make heavy metal gates. Then he focused and created huge gates, stunning everyone. He ordered Ordo to cut it with his sword, saying it had grown together by itself. He wanted to test its strength. Ordo swung with all his might. It was a powerful blow, but only a small trace remained, and Van felt that this was not right, but the others immediately disagreed with him. The next morning he woke up irritated and cramped after a night in a tight space with only a sleeping bag. His body ached. He didn't even have time to properly get himself together. On the road they slept in camps and wagons. Even in the village their bed was a carriage. Outside, till an Anin met him on the street, he was fine, but Tail and the rest were completely exhausted, too tired, and it couldn't go on like this. Before defending the village, they needed food, clothes, and a roof over their heads. He decided to start building a house. He asked Cayman to grab wooden beams, and Rhonda came up and asked what was going on. Van said he wanted to build a house there, and checked if it was safe and suitable. Rhonda replied that it was the center of the village, the perfect place for Van's mansion. Van also, when he was free, thought about the festival. He felt strength within himself, but initially doubted whether he could build something more than a simple little house. He made 4 support beams, then set the size. He imagined it like wire spread on the ground. Thick posts were best suited, then floors and walls were needed, and only after that the roof. He imagined it, but now the house seemed much bigger. Next were the interior walls. He used all the blocks and finished the house. Kitchen, toilet, 1 large bedroom, a smaller one, and 2 tiny rooms. They had to be used, otherwise Sparta would be offended. He put shutters on the windows. He needed to ask the traders about sand for the court. The house was ready and quite spacious, but Sparta did not consider it large. He considered it a bit small, but it was the most magnificent house here. It didn't even seem wooden, and everyone admired Van's skill. His magic was enchanting, but he still believed that powerful combat magic surpassed it. Peasants should see their lord as a reliable shield. Till insisted that she would rather choose Van's city than Jelpa's domain. Sparta agreed. In war, the fight is important, but in peacetime, people want a leader who makes their lives better. He could not imagine anyone better than Van for this. The group arrived, and Dee was especially stunned. He could not understand how, with the help of Vancrafting, a house was created so quickly by magic. Then he said, if there was more wood, I would build homes for everyone. Dee ordered his team to grab food and, if necessary, use carts. Van had never seen such lightning-fast work before. Even Orda was happy about the house and offered to chop wood. He urged on. No one wanted the knights to outdo them. Van was puzzled. Orda lived in the village, and she did not need such a place at all. Soon Rhonda brought the peasants, and said with a smile that Van could build houses. People began telling Van about their housing problems. He even feared it would not be limited to one house. He regretted telling Dai. But their dilapidated huts immediately caught the eye. Finally he agreed and only threw out, line up for new homes. If his magic could even slightly lift their spirits, he had to do it. Ispa and the peasants were diligently strengthening the barricades. He, Mr. Orr, and a few others were chopping logs. Van led Till and Cammon to build houses. He was already accustomed to his ability to skillfully manage such structures. He also wanted to design interiors himself. It seemed that he was just following someone else's instructions. This upset him. The days of corporate slavery came to mind, but once he started, he couldn't stop. Dee was still amazed by the vast reserves of Van's magic, as building such an impressive estate required true skill. The homes were arranged in 4 groups, streets and alleys stretched in a regular grid. This style was called block. The houses of ordinary people were all the same, to be fair. This is enough for now, but when the cornerstone appears, it will later remodel every house. Although already grateful, the peasants bowed and brought gifts as soon as they saw him. Next to the estate, he also built a small, simple bathhouse. He built it for himself, but he was pleased that it brought pleasure to others as well. Pool purified the water with her magic and heated it with an old, proven fire. Pool then called Van to swim with them. He was confused and embarrassed. They saw an 8-year-old in him, but in his soul he was already over 20. He bathed himself, then went to his empty room. The sleeping bags inside looked dull and sad. So he quickly made beds for everyone. He crafted simple bedding from local hay and straw. I dive into sleep in a cozy bed made of tranquility. After a good rest, he woke up and found a delicious breakfast, along with the cash register before him. He ate in his own home and freely laughed with his relatives until he felt wonderful, but Asada told Van that they needed a stable income. Now merchants brought goods monthly. They were the only link to the outside world, and Asada looked stern, although an omelet stuck to his mustache. Then he did not want to discuss it over breakfast and felt grounded in Asada. He firmly said he would handle the houses, furniture, clothes, and everything necessary for the home. They had enough supplies. He intended to strengthen the defense. But Asada noticed they lacked spices. He added that they had nothing for Van's favorite sweets. Van got angry, decided to do something to sell now, and asked for advice. Kempson suggested using Van's wooden blocks, but this idea was rejected. Only Van could make them. Till suggested hunting monsters for materials, but Van sharply refused. Otto and the team were already hunting. They were protecting their ship and not touching the villages. Asada said, "We will sell the harvest stand, everything will get better, but this village is so peculiar that quick money cannot be made here. Everything goes hard and slow." They needed the best option. Zara was sure that Van was head over heels in love. He already told them to test it. Let's see how it goes. He was engaged in removing traps, but said that they were afraid to spoil Van's special talent. Zara assured them that everything would be fine, noticing Kempson's anxious looks. Zara showed a piece of oak, covered with leather inside, and on the edges. Thanks to this, it became strong and durable. He asked Kamen to strike, and when the blow was barely felt, he almost urged him to hit harder. But suddenly the oak cracked in half, like thin paper, and everyone was shocked. Tears welled up in Zara's eyes when he saw that his fresh oak was destroyed. He sighed in surprise and regret when he learned that it was just a wooden weapon, then told him to keep it, promising to make it stronger than before. He really did so. Or come and ask what they are up to. He saw the van and immediately thought, could they sell it? He said that many strong evil spirits live in the deep forests, probably because of the Wolf Mountains, and added that rare minerals can be obtained from there without climbing to the peaks. Iron ore and also silver, copper, a bit of gold, and even mithril ore. Van was delighted with this find. They were lucky to find them in the forest. Ordo thought mining here has always been difficult. The place is remote, the land harsh, and it seems only nitraps were tried here, hardly mentioning herbs or ore. Van said this was the perfect chance for skilled adventurers to start digging. If there are rich deposits at the foothills, then in the Wolfsburg Mountains there are surely even more. First he began processing the iron ore. If with wood the processing layered evenly, in the ore the magic seeped unevenly, slowly in some places, quickly in others. The parts that processed quickly turned to sand. A third of the original size was left to test quality, and the rest had to be melted and purified because he was not sure of the initial purity of the ore. Zara impatiently asked Van if he would forge a sword from this. Even a thin, double-edged one would do. Or maybe it's worth asking oneself, does he really love swords so much, or does he just like all iron weapons? Van said that since Zara brought the ore, he would forge weapons for all travelers. Zara, shining with joy, asked for a dagger and a long sword. "Thank you very much, thank you very much, thank you very much, thank you very much. Thank you very much, 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 thank you very much. Thank you very much, 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 thank you very much. Thank you very much, thank you very much, thank you very much, thank you very much." He concentrated and began shaping the first iron weapon. The blade was thicker than a katana, but the edge had to be razor-sharp. He also thought that the metal's density was important, only left to assemble and firmly fix, and within seconds he was already holding a finished sword in his hands. It was fast not because of shoddy work, but because it clearly showed his skills had grown. He handed it to Zara. She squealed with joy. Everyone crowded to see the new sword, and Van, despite the chatter, tried to make it longer in the same style. He succeeded. He crafted a sharp, strong sword, and he handed it to Zari, seeing Zari's equipment. Other adventurers were clamoring, demanding that Van also make them weapons. Paul said that without inspection it was hard to judge, but they could fetch a tidy sum. This area could be called a rare find. Deposits in the forest, not in the mountains, were unusual. Iron sand was more common. There seemed to be very little ore in these rocks. They were waiting for stone, iron, or other ore veins so nearby dungeons could explain this, but the Ordinance crew never found anything like that. Zara wondered, could these be remnants of golems, broken long ago? Someone could ask if there was a dungeon nearby, but no one knew yet. They hadn't explored the surroundings, so a dungeon could be hiding somewhere close. They say if you find a dungeon, it will transform their trade and bring a bunch of customers to the village. Van smiled slightly, pleased with the thought that the village would benefit from the dungeon he might discover. Dungeons were bursting with treasures. Most weapons, precious stones, and relics in the country came from them. Because of this, they were vital. The Adventurers Guild rules required members to report new dungeons. When the guild received such a report, it could open a branch in the nearest city. Discovering a new dungeon was a true victory for an adventurer. It was a reliable way to make a name for oneself, break into the ranks of top adventurers, and gain the first chance to explore it. Then he noticed that if the village reported the dungeon now, they would hardly be able to cover the expenses demanded by the guild. They chose a place and agreed. Adventurers, merchants, and knights would flood there in droves. Food and supplies were already barely enough. Moreover, there was a looming threat of an attack from the neighboring country Ferdinand could strike, and asking whether to search for the dungeon would mean they would be expelled. Poole said that as soon as word about the dungeon spread, the knights would rush there immediately. And Van's magic instantly saved them from construction problems. Van said he was an outsider in the Fertile family. If they got a chance, they would remove him, so first they had to grow the village, and only then claim the dungeon. Then the Fertile family would not be able to reach them. Ordo commanded the group to bypass the area where the dungeon might be hiding. Gathering resources along the way claiming rights to it now was pointless, but Van harbored hope for a future reward. Dungeons are important both for the kingdom and for the nobility. His family considered him worthless, unnecessary in their plans, and said that the dungeon could change everything, but for now it had gone to one of his brothers. Therefore, he had to put his skills to use to keep this village for himself. Growing up next to Till, Van said they had managed with housing for now. Next in line were financing and defense. Till asked if his magic was still holding, and Van admitted that he was already exhausted. When he is exhausted, he can barely do anything. They needed workers. But there were barely any craftsmen among the locals. He wanted the stash of weapons and shields to be ready even before the appearance of traitor. Defense was just as important. The outer wall was almost ready. He laid stones and made the walls strong like concrete. At first, they were low and thin, but he fixed that. On the wall, he attached a simple ballista with leather parts. In front stood a large shield that allowed them to safely shoot large bolts, even under enemy fire. He placed towers along the edge of the village and even equipped them with ballastas. Till went for dinner, and as soon as she left, Van thanked Kansas. But he sensed something wrong and started asking about it. Kempson said he only brought stones. His wagon smoothly reshaped the village. He apparently still did not fully understand Van's abilities, and Van himself, as a lord, decisively stated his task was to serve for the good of the village. He inquired whether Kempson had any dreams. Kempson is going to guard the wagon. Van valued his loyalty, but gently asked not to press too hard. At the same time, he saw Kempson's honesty and deep devotion. He decided that next time he would craft armor for him. His favorite knight deserved the best protection to stay safe in the most dangerous moments. For 3 days he worked tirelessly. Return. The village turned into a small fortress. It seemed perfect to him, but he wondered where else you could find such a protected place. He no longer considered it a village, rather a compact fortress, and now bandits had no chance to slip past those walls. They wondered what could happen if Jalpa saw the power of Master Van. They finally realized, in this family, combat skills are valued above all. Arguing is pointless, but someone insisted that the idea of using Van's talents in battle should not be dismissed. Over time he will surpass everyone. Their dispute flared up, so Van intervened. It is useless to regret the past or the gifts one was born with. It is important to adapt and thrive with what fate has given, and he threw out a few sayings that were picked up. And it seems they like it. De quietly laughed and nodded at Van's words. When the atmospheric light played, it was time to get down to business. The ditches were just dug, but they were still dry. The ditch was perfect for defense. It even looked nice. He did not think they should ignore drinking water. The bottom and sides of the trenches needed reinforcement, so it was necessary to lay a path for water. Now they carried water from the river or filtered collected rain, and he was thinking about a more reliable water source. A sound came from behind. The bandits had already arrived. They were approaching from the opposite side. Van ordered to raise the bridge and close the gates. He asked if anyone else was still outside and sent someone to check. He just stood in place. They willingly followed his orders, but the fight still scared them. It was like that last skirmish. He was a little scared too, but as a lord he could not show it. He acknowledged their fears, saying that some might get hurt. This struggle decided the fate of the village, so he decided to stand in its defense. He admitted he could not manage alone and asked for their help. Vance's inspired speech hit right at the heart, and they no longer looked scared. Van began giving orders, but even before going out, she grabbed him. Seeing her tearful eyes, he said to him. He ordered D to take his team and scout the enemy's actions. Dai, full of confidence, said, "Van, you can count on me." They called him a brilliant leader and genius, the best even when the odds were against him, or he was cornered. Dai was sure that Van would win. He was proud to have outplayed Commander Straddle and now served Van. He trusted him and was ready to give his life. Dechek surveyed the area, and his man reported that it was now clear what groups were there, probably bandits. He saw that they were heading straight for them and told them. Van, he added that they were a few hundred yards away. They needed to prepare for defense. Van asked if anyone was pursuing them. Such a thing could have happened. While they hesitated, someone noticed the tail-armored dragons were rushing at them. Lipgrim, that's what's strange. Even the most skilled knights barely manage armored dragons. In this village, there were not enough experienced fighters. It seemed the dragons were driving the bandits straight at them, and ordinary weapons could not pierce their armor. Magic worked, but now only Spada and the adventurer's daughter could fight. The travelers went for provisions themselves. Without a mage, the strong knight could have delayed the dragon and hit its weak spots, but the villagers were not capable of that. Under the blows of tail and claws, they could not withstand. Then he ordered everyone to take positions at the ballistae and keep bolts at hand. They were also strongly urged to listen to Van's advice. The villagers fled from the dragons, shouting for help. The attack seemed endless. Even in a large city, it was barely held back. They counted about 40 armored dragons, each 8 meters long, and suggested using bandits as bait. Vance set them against each other and asked for another option. This made D laugh, who said sorry. He believed that laughter before danger relieves tension. In such trouble, a way out will be found. He shouted to them to aim at the dragons and open fire as soon as the bandits reached the moat. Van asked if the bandits could get to him from there. They said that hitting the eyes or mouth would work and increase the chances, and boldly claimed that no one would die today. They would win this fight. He boasted, "Tonight for dinner, dragon barbecue." Then the bandits rushed to the village. Overwhelmed with horror at the pursuing dragons as they approached, the fear only deepened. He put his team on alert, hiding it because he felt how grim the situation was. He ordered the catapult team to launch. Arrows flew, but before the dragons, it seemed to dissolve. Doing nothing, and yet Van's arrows really pierced their hides. Someone hit a dragon's paw, broke it, and crushed it. They didn't kill many, but it was a shock. When Van asked me what happened, Dai shouted that he did something incredible, but Van never understood what it was about. Dee explained, said that with one shot, they knocked down 10 dragons. They added the arrows ran out. More from the spare ballistae are needed. Van suggested wooden ones if there was no iron left. He gave the order and prepared his men. After the first volley, confidence broke through. Victory seemed inevitable. The next shots would be sharper. The people on the watchtowers took their places, and had no doubt they would win. He called the arrows to show the village's power. Reagan howled in pain. His scream echoed everywhere. Wooden arrows were less effective than iron ones, but still pierced thick scales. He shouted to them, "Keep using wooden arrows, aim and shoot." After several rounds, all the dragons fell. Victory was achieved. To destroy 40 dragons with only 60 arrows, it simply did not fit in Commander Straddle's mind. He beamed with pride for Van. He approached Van, who was glowing with excitement. For Van, it was the first time he had seen dragons, and he froze in amazement, calling them dinosaurs. Delaft had absolutely no idea about that term. Desjoy burst with joy, turned the wagon around, and rejoiced in his victory. Van saw people behind the gates, and Desit 30 survived. They were tied up and warned, obey or else. The bandits, frightened, even offered to become slaves and begged to be given work. Rhonda told that these people had attacked their village more than once. The angry villagers attacked them because of old family losses. It was then that a swan grabbed him by the fist, not wanting him to stoop to their level. He said that they would stand trial, so there was no reason to respond to their bad deeds in kind. Returning to the bandits, he said sternly that punishment awaited them. When reinforcements arrived, they would be taken away. Meanwhile, he entrusted them with gutting the dragons to extract magical cores. He could not believe how incredible the past week had been, and he knew for sure that these memories would stay with him forever. Zara was no less stunned. The quality of the weapons was simply impressive. Even if only 30 people could use the wagons and flawless swords, they managed to process only about 45 bodies per day, so everything was decided by time, and Ordo decided to start cutting them into pieces while they were still fresh starting the next day. The Doris team, the Cayman team, and the free people took care of the remains, and Van reworked the material of his cleaning knife. It became much sharper. The group dispersed within 3 days, and on that very night, Van gave a sincere thank you, thanking the villagers and everyone for their hard work, and now there were no money troubles in the village. They could calmly enjoy any spices he prepared. He threw a feast for everyone and warned, drink no more than 2 glasses. Van savored the dragon meat, crispy on the outside, juicy and tender inside, and it slid over his tongue. Ordo noticed that under the hard shell hid fatty, juicy meat. That's why dragons are so expensive and profitable to sell, or why ballista arrows must match the power of the weapon. But Dee overheard and felt broken. He was not given a sword, while the adventurers enjoyed theirs. Dee and his team rushed at Van, pleading for swords and daggers. And although Van received thanks and offers of food, he remained humble. The peasants thought he was a weirdo. He did not abandon his habits, even though a difficult path awaited ahead. Dai himself almost attacked the bandits who killed his family, but sincerely thanked Van for restraining him. He promised to make the village better for the sake of those he lost. Rhonda and his assistant enjoyed the feast, and the woman was happy that they could be together even despite the presence of aristocrats. Asada warned her, "Do not think like an aristocrat," but that was exactly what attracted Van. Till looked at Van and felt that soon he would accomplish even greater deeds. Later Ordo, Van, and others gathered and actively discussed the sale of dragons. Ordo said that the merchants would pay 20 gold coins for an armored dragon. But most of the meat spoiled, so they could not sell it. After deducting transportation costs, about 8 coins remained from each body, and from 30 bodies it amounted to over 300 coins. Then he mentally converted this into yen, over 300 million. Espat praised him for the defensive efforts, and Van thanked him for the protective barrier. Sada noted that despite the success, the law required, villages earning over 100 gold had to pay 50 tax to the Marquis's treasury. Revealing the village's wealth, Hispat explained that hiding it would be difficult but possible, and left with Van stunned. He had never met anyone as devoted to that sign for decades as Espada, and here he proposes a trick to deceive his father. This did not look like a dungeon. Now they will secretly bury the truth, betraying his father. Yet he wanted peace without his son's involvement, so Van asked him to tell about the plan. The one he quarreled with said he would tell his older brother Miri about it. He received all the glory for the dragons. Knighthood failed, so he said Hessen, and adventurers in the forest came across a herd and said they had destroyed it themselves. Venz's 3 older brothers fought over who would become the head of the family, each rejecting him, trying to earn favor. But Van really wanted Mercia, his loyal supporter, to come out victorious. He decided his plan was brilliant and announced it. The next morning the villagers loudly praised Van. He grabbed Till's hand. She initially flinched, but was glad he noticed her feelings. Although Van tried to look mature while bathing, he was only 8, so he exercised his right to be a child. Eventually he let go of her hand to preserve pride, though the thought that Till might one day leave him hurt him. Instead, he decided to think about her happiness. Van began to say something about Till's future partner, but she immediately interrupted him. She said she wanted to stay to take care of him and was not thinking about anyone else. At the gates, they later asked the guards if they noticed anything strange, and it turned out, the merchants, Mr. Bell and Lango. Van barely made out their dark silhouettes, but the guard recognized their faces. To avoid risk, Van ordered to prepare the bridge beams and ballast, although they protested. The traders insisted they were not bandits. Van was nervous. The bandits could be hiding in or near the cart, and danger lurked in the village, so he did not want to take chances and sent Kin for Orto. They had a lot to do, and everything depended on how quickly and confidently Orto would manage. The moment Van had been waiting for finally came. Meanwhile, the merchants got stuck. Their cart broke down and a lot of goods were spoiled. The man inside ordered the driver to calculate how much the repair, overnight stay, and escort would cost. Even reaching Hashimura, they barely earned anything, and the bald merchant approached the narrator and asked, "Is this Hashimura?" He noticed that it did not look like a village at all. For a moment it seemed they were lost, but there was no mistake. While they argued, Van shouted from the gates and introduced himself as Vani Furto, the owner of the village, demanding, "If you are merchants, name your company, and if escorts, name your roles." Hearing his name, the merchants were embarrassed. 2 bald men hesitated and said their base was in the largest city, where they often saw Van's name, and it was definitely him. The driver froze at Van's youth. He knew geniuses were often recluses, but not so much that the leader himself would send him to the border. They introduced themselves, Mary Bell Merchant, his brother Lingo also a merchant and guard, and a traveler named Air. Van asked Ordo if he recognized them, and Ordo smiled. Yes, we had already met at the Venture Guild and even drank together. Van let them into the village and warmly welcomed them. Rhonda and others warmly greeted Bella and Lengo. they apologized for the long absence and said with obvious relief that they were glad to see everyone was fine. Van quickly asked if they would buy parts of the dragon's armor. Both brothers instantly lit up. Adventurers were afraid to face such tough creatures, so this was a rare opportunity for them. Almost with tears of joy in their eyes, they followed Van to the warehouse. When they arrived and saw the stack, 23 meters of armored dragon materials, Bella and Lango's jaws dropped in amazement when Ven said they had defeated about 40 armored dragons and captured about 30 people, then began to consider whether to use these prisoners for transporting cargo. He added that their cart had already been repaired. Sorting through all this, Del said they needed to call the merchants as soon as possible. They asked Van to wait a month to settle everything. Van agreed, saying there was no rush. It was time to enjoy the delicious meat. They realized the village would not be able to eat all that meat before it spoiled, and asked Van if he minded if they sold it to a neighboring village, offering to cover the expenses. Van pondered whether the village could even pay for such meat. Del said it was a poor place. After this year's taxes, they probably had no money and likely little food as well. He suggested giving some meat for free to help. Van appreciated the idea and said he would donate. Although Bella was a merchant, Van noticed that profit was not his top priority, and Van's sharp mind impressed Bella. Bella offered to pay the bandits generously even if their earnings were meager. It was still income. Van thanked him and invited him to return, promising a truly advantageous offer. Like armor of the highest quality, they will be shocked again. He asked if he could bring a blacksmith, also a skilled draftsman and carpenter, and then flashed a charming smile. Showing the armor created by heat, they froze in amazement. Bell did not fully understand all the pros and cons of this weapon, but the demonstration itself was exciting. Ordo gave him dragon skin for testing. He easily cut it. The air guard became worried and wanted to buy some. They were impressed by Ven's incredible offers, but admitted they couldn't take too much. Ven said it was okay, they could buy more later. When they were walking around the village, Van showed his new projects, and then served them delicious dragon meat. Bell asked if merchants came every month and suggested doubling these visits to twice a month with the help of a trading group. Van said they needed supplies and sake. One good meal lifted the villagers' spirits, and he also asked to place an advertisement for their weapons. He suspected the brothers wanted an exclusive deal, and he liked that. He said that if two merchants stuck to this route and sold weapons together, they would soon reach his village. Van suggested making advertising the more they sold, the more they would earn, and this greatly interested the brothers. He suggested a village store. They sighed. If only they could talk to the owner of the enterprise or some traders, it would be simply wonderful. Bell and Lango shone with the thought of a stable income and their own shop. They even talked about building a house for them. If they agreed, the shop would appear through dealings with several traders. It would be the first in the village and a win for both sides. Bell said to Lango. Before leaving, they decided to lay this out to the boss and assured that they would get a job in the local store until things got better. They shook hands, sealing a successful deal. Van also asked that his brother Mersha receive a letter detailing all his achievements near the village gates. He built a shop for Bell. He was sweating and almost crying with joy, telling that downstairs there was a shop, upstairs living quarters, and in the basement a warehouse. He followed Bell's instructions as precisely as he could, and Bell trusted Van's craftsmanship, but did not expect that such incredible power would be at his hands. The goods were to be ready in 2 weeks, so for now they were finishing matters with Bell's shop. That same day they left the village and headed to the river, and after a long walk the wagon finally gave out. But insisted that everyone keep going. Cayman went ahead, clearing the way for them. Honestly, Van sincerely tried to show everyone his kindness and care, but it was hard for him to keep up strength. Cayman was too strong. The trip from the village lasted an hour, and before them unfolded a long, picturesque river from which they took water. And with this, they immediately set about building a water pipeline. Espa instantly tore out dozens of meters with magic. When he caught his breath, D, Kin, and others started digging by hand, while Van walked behind and reinforced the walls. Espa's magic amazed with its incredible power. They also worked tirelessly, although approaching 40, until someone noticed how hard their work was. Considering the village's remoteness from the river, water was vital, the work exhausting, but he felt that joint labor for a goal gave true satisfaction. Beyond the barrier reigned joy and mutual help. Better living conditions would improve life and attract traders and visitors. This is how he envisioned an easy life here. After 8 hours, the village finally appeared on the horizon instead of a week as planned. They raced at incredible speed. Van said that's all for today, and Espa and D were shocked. Just a few more hours, and it would have ended. Van pointed with his finger at Abula and Cayman. Virgin D noticed them. He thought it was a cool training, but still agreed with them. The hidden strength of the senior crew members and veterans was frightening. The next day they reached the village in mid-morning, surprising everyone, and prepared to direct the water. Van enthusiastically praised their incredible work. They opened the stream, and the water poured inside with quiet, calm beauty. Children and people from the village shouted joyfully when the water flooded the village. Rhonda was glad that they saved time and effort, but the water still had to be strained and boiled before drinking. Liu came. He was bitten by curiosity about the tool he was going to make. Ven suggested building the filter together, and Liu immediately jumped at the opportunity. The filter was made from branches, leaves, sand, soil, pebbles, and pieces of cloth, which were placed in channels and near the village so that clean water flowed into a metal container. The tap under the tank opened, and water poured into the kettle. Nearby a crystal of fire magic, Liu approached Bell and directly asked if he was tracking those crystals. Van was happy with the result. He was worried about floods. The rain raised the water level. Spa was impressed. Van noticed this and explained that the channel was widened for the water volume and banks were built where floods often occur, although it was necessary to carefully think about how to do it. The water had nowhere to escape. Van had to make it so that excess water either returned to the river or collected in the lake behind the village as spoil, approved the river option, but admitted that the lake would be a real salvation during droughts when the river barely flows. The reservoir was worth its weight in gold. Van asked to pour enough water into the fortifications, and Espa confidently said the lake 200 meters behind the village was exactly what was needed, and they rushed to complete this vital task before the rains started in 3 days. The lake was almost finished. Van wanted to add an overflow or some other detail, but had not yet figured out what real benefit it would bring. For now, he was just a happy boy, delighted to have so much water. The next moment, Van was overcome with anxiety and irritation, and he woke up before dawn. Having found Rhonda and many others in a frantic frenzy, Dee and Espa had already set off for Lake Van. And the name, where it came from, Van had no idea, till said the lake was named in his honor. To leave a memory of his efforts, he noted, the village, as if the same, felt ominous. Something about it just didn't add up to him. Before they could discuss, a frightened villager ran into the room and shouted for him to go. Ven and Till raced to the lake. It seemed they took a background to get there. An agitated crowd gathered in the village, and Van asked what was happening. They pointed at something in the lake, and from there, as if in response, a figure looked at them. In the thicket of the forest, near the river, lived a legendary creature with bright blue hair. They were half humans, half mermaids called Abalu. Van had not heard of them, so Espa explained that they were rarely encountered and pointed to a girl. This was Avalu, after which Van asked her name. But she did not answer. She looked confused. The man told Till and Kin to bring meat and fruit. He believed that food was the first step to bonding. The girl slowly approaches, and everyone seems to freeze. After smelling the food, she asked hopefully if she could take it. Van got so scared that he frightened her, and she immediately ran away. He said sorry and her back with meat and fruits that she ate. After tasting the dragon meat, she frowned and asked who hunted it. D'Ortho and the rest under the name Van, although it was ballast work. Hearing this, she floated away and disappeared, leaving them frozen in amazement. The next day, Till burst into Van's room, shouting, Van. She said that the peasants reported an attack, and it caused chaos. The word attack struck and pulled him out of sleep. While he was dressing, Till said the enemy captured the water channel. Van did not think they would get so close, but was sure the ballasters would scare them off. With a short, smooth haircut, he was grumpy. Outside, he saw many abolices staring intently at him. Yesterday it was a child, and now adults of various ages were around, but all looked young. The eldest wanted to talk to Van. A nervous man named D called Orto and Espa to join him. Bell was also nearby and said that rare items of Abalabrath and the merchants who trade them considered it a big deal, so dealing with it was a smart move. Want to take a closer look. Van allowed him to go with them, and when they approached, the man said his daughter thanked Van. He heard that this guy defeated a dragon, and it seemed to be true. Other Algalis froze in amazement. They wondered if he was a powerful mage, and immediately noticed the strong guys standing next to him. The man praised him as a brave person, and announced that he had consented to the marriage of Van and Opera. After a quiet pause, he suddenly shouted in shock, and everyone standing behind froze in place. Questions swirled in their heads. What did this guy mean? Who was Alpura, and what wedding was this about anyway? Ovest, the man and father of Opera, asked for a wagon, but it was refused. When asked where she was, it turned out she had already gone to play with friends. Van sharply asked how long he had been preparing this marriage, emphasizing that she was just a child. Ovest gently explained that their race was completely different, unique, and had never dealt with humans before. And the dragons recently captured their river and killed their kin, so they were looking for a strong companion for Alperia who would protect them. Van understood that they needed strength for safety like nobles who strengthen alliances through marriages and insisted that she marry the one she loves. Then they loudly and decisively declared that they would guard Algalu without entering into marriage. Vesta then said they will stay with the son-in-law and ask for a wagon on this water. Van did not own Clarify and suggested moving to the lake where there were bridges because guests or traders might get scared. Suddenly he heard Vesta call him son-in-law. He tried to explain that he had not agreed to the marriage, but they had already set off, and Priora called him her husband. Esper noted that Van was lucky. He managed to come to an understanding with the Abdals. They joked that Van's first wife was a real tough one, and she did not object if Van decided so. But even if he refused, the husband's protests simply failed. The Abdis joyfully spent time at the lake, and Van wondered if he, as the owner of the lake, should look after them. To see the matter through, he built 2 shelters with roofs and walls where one could rest. They could hang out peacefully. Van was glad they liked it, and Espad did not even know that such buildings were considered scarier. Van's extensive knowledge, unknown even to Espad, impressed him. Peasants began talking with Agalu and sharing grain dishes. Soon rumors spread that the laboratory brought ores. Their connection strengthened, so Van decided to build another wall. Stronger than before, and so large that it could embrace the lake and make the village safer for a below. Spa suggested adding features for a decimal city to allow planning ahead. Van asked in surprise if it would be gigantic, for 10,000 people. Simply extending rural growth was not enough, since the wall meant guards had to be placed, so Espa advised building for a large number of people on a compact plot. Van wondered if a setting for 1,000 or 2,000 would work better. But Espad disagreed. He said it would take more time later, that this important moment needed to be considered first, and that it would not happen soon. His stubbornness came out when he spoke, and even his father could not argue. Spo continued, each sector must stretch at least 600 meters and accommodate defense, homes, and guild bases. Wall construction would start later when there were enough people, but for now, the wall could only be outlined to expand later, and Espo added that such a non-square fortified city would require wagons. He explained that mages often broke through one weak point, but a square city was easiest to defend, just like a star-shaped city. Their triangular sections, even if broken through, would not connect with city roads and could simply fall off the edge of the wall. There was no point in rushing and hitting the corners before the core. Even when enemies bypassed them to smash walls attacked from 3 sides, this scheme, which worked on Earth with firearms, suited this world of sword and magic as well. Ispa added that when an attack comes head-on and force is focused directly, corner strikes cannot scatter sideways. Therefore, the decisive role was played by the number of people. It was a reliable scheme, he assured, and even skilled mages could not cover the infantry. In the middle of the conversation, someone suddenly burst in, let's say. The envoy of Count Ferdinand arrived. Not only the coat of arms of Ferdinand adorned the message, but also a unicorn and the shield of Viscount KN, symbols of the rising nobility and Ferdinand's circle, who owned this city, and he thought that perhaps he would want to reclaim it. At the gate stood a girl and a woman. The tales about this so-called child genius did not impress them. In the carriage, 2 women were chatting. One was calm, and the other said, "Don't worry, first we will find the person worth approaching." Van was preparing for the guests, while Till was laying out tea and snacks, worrying about how many people might come. He was nervous, but still hoped that everything would end well, and did not come to his door, and he gladly let the guests inside. 2 women entered, one older, the other younger. He greeted them and said that he was entrusted with caring for this land. The elder, Panamura Carrera KN, had just risen to this status from the night background. The younger was Erit Ferdinand, the youngest daughter of Count Ferdinand. She explained that she had heard that Marset Pharaoh lived here, and her father wanted her to meet him. Van was taken aback that they sent the youngest, and Panamura was her guard. Although he felt a bit uneasy, he thanked them for visiting his simple village. To rise from the night wasteland to such a position in one generation is rare. She was clearly clever and strong. Panama noticed how he looked steadfast, although he was younger than they thought, and without any hidden intentions. She asked what, in his opinion, their visit was about, and Van felt that she was testing his guesses. He whose lands had shrunk could feel bitterness in his soul, and at the same time admire the markets. The Count feared that Marcetta would strike, so he sent Panamura and Ruth. Van suggested that they were here to scout the opponent's position and negotiate with him. Panamura laughed loudly. She couldn't believe that a 10-year-old boy had grasped it all. She agreed with his theory, and smiling, added that Mr. Ferdinand could not understand Marset Pharaoh at all. Lately, his name appeared more and more often on people's lips like the key heir everyone was looking for. A great event was approaching, and Marcus never tired of boasting about his constant successes. But since it still hadn't started, they came. She vainly tried to understand why he was chosen for the role of the thief, perhaps due to a lack of 4-element magic. Rumors called him a wunderkind, and owners of thieves usually needed the best knowledge to develop their lands, so the count wondered why he was placed near the borders of the county and the kingdom of Jinnit. It was not an exaggerated ambition. Here, nobles were forbidden to kill each other, and Van, surprised by her straightforwardness, thought what a woman she was. He admitted that he did not possess four-element magic, and her other fears turned out to be unfounded. They left him here just on a whim. Panama found it hard to believe. She asked if the rumors were true that he was a crew member. She had heard that it was just a village with 100 houses. But in just a month or two, he raised the fortress walls, renovated the buildings, and began using materials that no one had seen before. And he even had a skillful butler, and the knight was a true master. She estimated he had at least 5,000 people. They were frightened by the technology that concealed the army's movements, but he did it anyway, knowing he would be noticed, and turned the border into a military center, she said. And this only fueled her even more. He apologized for laughing and tried to clarify her misunderstanding. He told her that his father allowed him to take only the horse and some equipment. His family didn't even say goodbye, they just told him to slip away quietly. She pressed him, questioning about that night, about the butler, and about the people outside. Before Van could answer, Deep interrupted, saying that they were attracted by his mind and talents, so they went with him. He added that at night he was ordered to return, but he brushed it off. Espa picked up and said that he was old. Seeing Van leaving, he smiled and thought it was a great time to retire and pass on all his knowledge and skills to him. Till added, it doesn't matter if he is noble. Van treated them honestly, and she enjoyed working for a kind master who valued his team. Van felt deep gratitude to his loyal followers who joined him in this remote place. And Panamera insisted she needed to understand how the village was changing. He decided to show, not explain, even though she was puzzled. He casually mentioned that he wanted to build another fortress while they were on the street. When they went out, the peasants were standing and waiting for Van. He asked to bring wooden blocks and headed beyond the fortress. Panamera asked where they were going, and he looked her in the eyes without looking away. Feeling her anxiety about a possible trap, he remained silent. The guide led them to the place and assured that it was suitable, although the edges were worn. Van suggested a wall 2 meters wide. They will fix it later, and a fortress will be built in front of it. Showing his skill as a formations master, he sighed, the wall will fall as soon as its magic fades. Molded from bones, volcanic and earthly stones, and a bit of ore. He had a generous mix of resources. He hoped to make strong concrete from what was lacking, so he resorted to a temporary solution. Panamera, impressed, asked if houses could also be built from those materials. He nodded while forging the metal gates and said he had to imagine their shape and strength. After finishing the wall and gates, he amazed everyone, prompting the princess and Panamera to doubt his magic, which he described as production magic, only fit to do things but useless in society. The Princess Aret's father was constantly busy and had no time for her, and her indifferent mother left the girl in the care of a caretaker. Considering her unnecessary dude, her shy, picky nature and weak learning skills, she had no real talent except for doll magic. She was clumsy in movements, she couldn't even dance, but she moved dolls better than she could move herself. Although helpless in most matters, this skill finally lifted her mother's mood. Joyfully appreciating the rare parental praise, she trained diligently, but her mother only shouted that she was a useless child, leaving the rope confused and not understanding what her fault was. Later she learned that high society despised her magic, and this shattered her last hope. And her mother stopped coming, others ignored her. She lived silently, holding her breath. She blamed herself while her mother's screams still echoed. At 10 o'clock, her father called her. Panamera was nearby. Someone questioned why he sent the company, hinting at someone else. He silenced her nonsense when talking to Arat, who was thinking about her. Panama asked if she knew about the upcoming wedding, and at these words she began to cry. Panama said that skill can spark gossip about marriage, but no one will cancel it, or it asked if her uselessness meant she would have to leave home. Panama boldly explained that all her relatives were already married, so only she remained, and one good groom would be quite enough. She warmly grabbed her hand, and finally outsiders began to care about it. Their 3-week journey brought Arad her first true joy. Panama was kind, though often angry, scolding over the futility of your routine, then hugging her, often starting a conversation by stroking her head. When it cried, Panama remained calm and gently stroked her again, or wrote jokingly on the door about her touch. She did not want marriage, she only needed the Panamanian side. So she decided to give this guy an empty, indifferent look. Van's uniqueness annoyed her. He immediately found common ground with Panamera. He had respected servants and loyal allies, and although younger, had achieved a lot. She assumed his parents valued his talents. But their indifference shocked her hearing him, and seeing the empty tricks of his feudal magic, her envy turned into admiration. Aristocrats revered the magic of the four elements, so she abandoned her own when her mother dismissed it. Now she was once again contemplating the practice. Penema realized that he could strengthen the key point by carefully assessing the lands of the count. Wen said that his father, who expelled him for production magic, had no idea about it at all. Panama called it nonsense. His skill could have expanded their kingdom, but Van did not expect that either. He suggested building the wall further so that it could remain a little longer, and she agreed without any plans. Walking through the village, Paimrikvis saw him and wondered with surprise how he made houses, whether he alone had production magic, and what materials he used. She understood only partially, not fully, but felt that their confusion had finally disappeared. Panama spoke about marriage with the root right in front of him, and he wondered was that why she came. He noticed that the outskirts were teeming with magical beasts that would only strengthen the village, but marriage was not necessary for peace. Interestingly, the number said that he himself tended that furrow. When Sir Ferdinand spoke about her marriage, she resolutely rejected it. Fearing that she would be married off to the youngest in the mayor's family, the child of a border lord who could be hostile, she doubted her roots, her joy and Vanagrid, a warning death from bandits or monsters. That is why Pan-American desperation turns the path into a forced marriage. She darkened with fear of yet another abandonment, and Van unexpectedly responded. He felt her pain and shared it. Panama softened, weighing Ruta's happiness, and would have agreed to the proposal if Van had wedded her. Though young, his wisdom and care for his people were much deeper than his years, and Panama noticed that Van's main abilities surpassed anything anyone could imagine. She admitted that she would marry him if they were equals, and this praise came from such a sweet woman. Ven blossomed inside from her admiration. He masks his feelings but is secretly delighted. She asked her if she felt the same and promised not to force her to choose. Marshrutt doubted Van. He admitted that he himself had not thought about marriage and said, if she cannot return home, she might stay in the village without wedding it. This is a matter of waiting that needs careful consideration. Even an ordinary arranged marriage would benefit him. The village's rapid growth would spread rumors and attract attention. His unique strength might attract the attention of rival countries, so he would have to strengthen his land defenses. Van asked if marriage to Arat would help him. She said it could bring future help from Count Ferdinand and her own support, and possibly avert an attack by order of Count Ferdinand, who seeks to reclaim these lands. He pondered, a political marriage takes better root when there are few enemies, many allies, and economic benefit. But the Count will gain nothing by offering the route, unless his father secretly sent him here. Right here, otherwise. No benefit and no sense in connections. Panama. Mara said they would spend the night, so he would have the whole day to think everything over and talk with her, or with Arat. Van was curious Shakatsi would stay. He reacted like a typical 10-year-old I use her. He asked if the soldiers would join. She said that enemy lands were dangerous for such a fragile woman as she was, that she needed their guards, although they looked at her knowing about her immense power. She directly asked the one she invited what to do and suggested going to Van's house, but she turned out to be too shy to answer. Panamera apologized to Van, noting how young she still was, and asked to live in her room, worrying if there would be enough space. Van immediately decided to build a dormitory. He led them outside to build one for Panamera, Arat, and the soldiers arranged a room for 4 awaited tents, but were delighted he invited them to dinner and kept them until departure, and in the end, the fluffy wolf meat perfectly matched the dish. Ordo's team hunted mystical beasts, and since the armored dragon appeared here, other creatures began to flock here. When the scaled wolves last came in packs, Van's team quickly felt that they provided a lot of tasty meat. They'll promise to cook it well for a possible union of Van with her root. Van asked if Till agreed, and she replied that after their time together it would hurt her, but she believed that Arat would support him, and she would gladly give herself to him completely. If his wife were kind, she would have stayed here. Ganson hinted that if he could, he would take someone stronger, say, Panamaru. Sad agreed that Panamera told the truth. Graf received nothing from Van wedding Ruth, and probably sent her away due to her lack of 4 elemental magics, meanwhile their kingdoms. For 5 years, Scaria tirelessly increased its influence. The surrounding peoples already feared them, so the king avoided clashes between allies. There were 2 options: go to war, which would ruin their wealth, or Van could take away their rights or undermine them from within. Then he insisted that, married or not, the most important thing was Ruth's decision. If she cannot return home, she can stay in the village without pressure because of marriage. If she wants to leave, he will allow it. They had not yet spoken a single word, so he planned to start a conversation with her during dinner. Later at the table, Van spoke first, asking if she enjoyed the meal. He said hopefully that as soon as there were more supplies, they could make sweets. Garut froze when he addressed her. She said that the meat and fruit salad were tasty and still pleasing. Arut was getting used to it earlier. She hardly spoke and often mixed up words, but Van did not judge her. Even Panamera, perfect in everything, noticed his rare qualities. She could not believe she had met someone like him, and then he asked what she was passionate about. She loved all things cute with unwavering confidence, and when he asked if she liked small animals, the answer was definitely yes. Dolls, beautiful flowers, and motionless creatures. Van, unfamiliar with dolls, asked to take a shot so that the passage of time would be visible. Calm, straightforward manner impressed with maturity, although this person was younger than her. Although she spoke slowly, impatience was felt in her voice. She said the dolls were in the carriage and offered to show them to him tomorrow. Van lit up with a smile and thanked her joyfully. She was overcome with a happy tremor from a strange fascination. She also reached for his gaze, so she let Van continue speaking. She felt more comfortable, and she also finally wanted to speak. All the time during dinner she wanted so much to look at him and ask something, but she lacked the courage, and the dinner ended. Remember praised the safety of the village and its calm, cozy atmosphere. She also said that the food was so delicious that she really wanted to know where he got all those spices and supplies. The locals also knew and respected him. Van agreed Till's kitchen was wonderful, and people were happy that there was plenty of food. Panama said that in his place, she would praise the village's success more so that the fame of his deeds would spread. Walls and houses were built from materials brought by the locals, and he simply worked with what was available, and was truly proud when the village population exceeded 1,000 residents. The conversation with Van ended, but he noticed Ruth. She looked as if she wanted to say something. After 5 minutes he asked her. She bowed and thanked him for the day. She was nervous because she thought he was the one she would have to marry. His kindness melted her fears. She wished him good night and then felt surprise within herself, but was glad that he left a good impression. Or at noon she hurriedly threw out words and left without giving him a chance to respond. Arut was worried that others would consider her strange and rude, and nervously got lost looking for the room until some woman led her there. Upon entering, she saw Panamera and her pajamas, who warmly welcomed her. Anamura wondered if the children had crossed a line just because they got along so well, and told her that she could share any of her ideas. Or her cheeks were burning bright red, like a tomato, so Panamera toned down the jokes a bit and offered her to stay a few more days if she wished. I decided to keep her longer. Panamera noticed that keeping them forever would not work and advised me to pay a few gold coins for their housing. Arud could think of nothing except her plan to talk to him the next day. She believed he would listen to her. For the first time in many years, she fell asleep eagerly awaiting the morning. The next day, Van gathered the peasants and, with burning eyes, announced that Asada would be entrusted with overseeing the construction of the fortress wall. It was not a new matter, so he hoped everything would go smoothly. The project was large, so he insisted they plan their time and take care of themselves. He and his team sincerely valued those supplies. Then he noticed Ordo watching and sharply asked about his intentions. But Ordo said he was only curious and would not interfere. He recalled how the peasants once lined up like troops, ready to hunt mystical creatures again. With new swords, it was a trivial matter. Van noted they would earn more if the animal materials were poor and the good ones given to Belle. Because it was Friday, he announced, today and tomorrow barbecue, time to use up their meat supplies. This sparked a wave of excitement among the quiet peasants, and they immediately took on a festive mood. Panamera, who was also nearby, felt that his speech was truly inspiring. They stood like an army, and these words lifted their spirits, emphasizing that freedom was his gift to them. And he saw Rut, who said hello and remarked on the nice weather, prompting Van to note her newfound energy. He asked if yesterday's trip had worn her out. Instead, he asked if he was going to be able to get out of the car. To the side, Arut was clenched with nerves, but he tried to speak calmly. She sought to understand the world through Van's eyes and examine his work up close. Later, they started solving the sewage problems, while Panamera and Arut were washing. Deep pipes ran under every building. Sea had to be regularly cleaned and flushed with water from the ditch. Otherwise, dirt would accumulate and people would get sick. Waste flowed into underground chambers and from there back into the river. Suddenly, a bunch of people appeared offering help, and Aura was stunned and embarrassed. They all said they lived nearby, and Van fed them. Suddenly, Priola Apiraj called herself Van's wife. Anamura and Arud waited for his response. He shuts down. They explained it was a mix-up. She told her father directly, "We are not engaged." Embarrassed, he called them idiots and left, others nearby. They scolded Van, but he diverted them with news about tasty fruits, and they stopped. He explained that they needed help lifting the slabs from the water. Abalo handled it instantly. They vowed to take care of it daily. Panama was a corn wagon that Abalo could drive. He said there were many reasons, but they settled right there. Next came the current project castle wall. Panemara was impressed. This area seemed truly amazing to her. Then he praised Asada for speed, said the surface was smooth, but the corners still posed a problem, and decided to draw a hexagonal outline on the ground. Around, he ordered Asada to build the wall exactly like that, and Asada agreed. Asada quickly grasped these unusual instructions. If the person marking the guides was inexperienced, the project would fail. He taught trigonometry, but memory failed him, so he decided to focus on the village center. Panemura couldn't resist and asked how exactly he was drawing that line. She offered to help, take a rope, measure segments, and tie several lines for precise marking, and they began by measuring the length of one side. Van looked at Arette and asked if she felt safe without guards. She nodded, and while they supervised the supply, they simultaneously began reinforcing the castle wall. Arette asked what that meant, so he described the ballista. To protect the village, they installed a giant bow with an arrow. The top of the wall was widened. The ballista was enlarged, and it made arrows the length of an adult's arm with 2 tiers, so that one ballista could fire twice in a row, and he began to think about the crossbow. But he was afraid of mistakes. The first attempt was already imminent, and he did not want to fail in front of 2 charming girls. They tested it with Cayman, and it worked flawlessly as he hoped, and she was surprised by the bow. Howard Van said it was much more powerful than a regular bow with arrows. Panama arrived. They asked about the loud rumble, fearfully thinking that a huge magical beast had attacked them, when Van clarified everything. She was stunned and asked if those ballistas were also standing on the wall. Van replied that they were slightly different. But already over 100 lined up along the defensive walls, and even more were planned. She inquisitively asked how long it would take, how much money it would cost, and what it was made of. Vince noticed her curiosity. But hiding the details, they called it a military post. The secret stunned Panama. She went out and was not at all depressed. They asked again and offered to buy a ballista at any price, but Van Grind said they were not for sale. Panama struggled to grow. Grass how far this remote village had advanced. He had advanced so far that he set production standards, magic, and ways to gain the loyalty of different races like Viscount Panamerica. Kara Cayenne felt a fresh breeze she had not known for years. She concluded an official pact with Van Neff Arrow and was already preparing to report it to the capital. Today by letter, usually alliances within the state were created for protection, but she insisted, this is an equal partnership. This would mark her as belonging to Van. She was an ally among the aristocrats, and if she betrayed him, her noble status would be destroyed. For Wayne, this was a real golden opportunity. Who gladly agreed to unite into a team, and Van bowed to her in response. The soldiers and comrades followed their example. Panama suggested that. She said that if he lent her ballast, she would give him 100 soldiers for 2 weeks, but he would owe her if even one did not return. Van agreed and asked to show. She needed a cart for transportation and arrows to load. Everything seemed heavy. A carriage was needed, and she noticed that arrows could be made of iron. Cameron approached and offered. While she grabbed 1 or 2 of Van's arrows, he showed the sword that Van had forged for him. It seemed Cameron was watching. She approached Panamera and felt a special connection with her. Seeing this new side of Cayman was truly intriguing. Panamera confessed that she felt. She became uneasy before enemies in armor and with shields. She said these were just expendable things, simply her spares, and dreamed of being able to make them herself. Even if they were low quality or damaged, Cameron still delivered his first strike. But he never thought she would explode. She locked him up but hardly noticed it until she saw her sword split in half, and this stunned and confused everyone. Everyone watched as Panamera asked if it was Cayman who said that. The sword was initially thought to be iron, but Van explained actually it was steel made in a special way. He added that the bolts were made of steel. Steel arrows, a bit sharper than usual, could pierce 2 or 3 armored dragons. Panamera and her people were. Again stunned by his skill, after that she fell. Are you forced to buy those arrows at night, but not others? Talked with Arat asked. If they get married, look after Van. They would be thrilled if someone as sweet as her joined their village. Arat blushed and got embarrassed, but Van intervened. He asked them to leave the guests alone. Although their teasing remarks about him and Arat embarrassed him, he restrained himself and told him not to drink anymore, then invited Arat to join them. When the measurements were finally made, the construction was about to be completed. About a month later, Arat asked again if he meant that street. Standing in front of the section of the wall, Van nodded, yes. She was impressed that the whole project would finish so soon, usually even magically. They raised an earthen wall. A pile of earth lay for some time, then they began to finish building it. It was necessary to complete a certain number of walls before the arrival of the merchant Lantis, or they would have asked if this merchant. He was worried, but Vanya smiled and said he wanted to shock him completely. The Panamera team was skilled and tireless. When the main supplies arrived, Asada finally began laying the foundation of the fortress and built it with her own hands. Van raised the ballista to the very top, and by evening the fortress was ready. They pulled it back. After 2 weeks, the triangular wall of the fortress was finally completed. Standard ballistas were installed at twice the usual size, and this made the village construction much more pleasant, and Panamera praised his impressive work. Van's attention involuntarily flew to her large fortress, her lush bust. He refocused and thanked her for. He helped strengthen the very heart of the fortress. Later, he suggested building homes for residents, merchants, and traveling adventurers who passed through or settled. Panamera always. She dreamed of such a project, but it required huge money and time, and borrowing from the prince, who had just lost his land in battle, she could not, so she refused his money, so that he could freely deploy military power there while they talked about the land. It trembled, and Ordo shouted that the dragon was approaching. Everyone was confused about the dragon in this distant wilderness. It was chasing Ordo and his. The team decided to hold it back while others retreated to the village. Van froze in surprise. Ordo was using himself as bait. They could fight inside, but Van did not know how to defeat such a gigantic dragon this time. He refused to let the villagers and others become its prey. The team awaited his orders. Panamera decided to come to the rescue. The dragon rose on its hind legs and began giving orders. Hands, he ordered Ordo to lure the dragon aside, while the others would counterattack the ballista. He shouted to everyone, "Get ready. Prepare to enter safety behind the wall. As soon as Ordo and his squad are inside, they will close the gates and climb the wall to help," Panamera commanded. She ordered 10 soldiers to escort Princess Ert to the village, and the rest to take the tops of the walls. Ert was more frightened than her. She stood frozen, stronger than ever. Van understood her fear. He approached her and quietly calmed her. He explained that although the forest was dry, the dragon was formidable. Their ballast was reinforced. Asada, the mage of the 4 elements, and Panamera's help filled them with strength. They admitted that they had not yet defeated him, but swore they would not lose. Eret calmed down. They prayed for success, then appointed someone to watch over her in the house, or sent someone to shout so she would not be seen. The gates still stood, but soon it arrived. Van ordered the team to push them. The ballast was guarded so they would not hit Ordo. Their original goal was bring him down. Aiming at the wings, they flood the dragon with everything. With all their might, the crowd stumbled and insisted that they leave her. Ignoring her, they pulled. He distracted the dragon, giving her time to get up and escape. Zoro struck the dragon again, but it barely noticed. He ran away, sobbing and shouting for them to leave him, and was stunned when they did, rushing away. By another route, Ordo, the fastest, said he survived, and Pool's sister was the first to reach the fortress. Then he would join them again when Zara hesitated. They decided it was about Kuzala's past sacrifice, then ordered the ballisti to fire as soon as she was ready. Panamera says it could have harmed her. He decided on his own to strike him in one eye. The blow, as befits her promotion to the night level. With one movement, her power exploded. She turned out to be a mage of the highest level of the 4 elements, as Van predicted, and released her fiery spear. But the dragon dodged the fierce. They moved on together with ballista. But those watchful eyes constantly avoid my gaze. Most of the arrows missed, only 5 hit that should have slowed his body, wings, and legs. Van could not imagine how exhausted they were, but the large ballista reloaded slowly. He ordered to prepare a second volley and fire as soon as possible. This shot missed completely, although the first dealt a deadly blow. Meanwhile, Ordo, Pool, and Zara reached the gates, still unable to truly confront the dragon. Panama launched another. They released a fiery spear to hold him back while retreating to the village. That is the power of the strange Van. For the first time, he saw elite fire magic, the kind that destroys anything. But it was a dragon. She immediately rushed to the village to plan a counterattack and then push everyone too. And he also rushed there. The dragon now settled on the fortress, its wings too wounded to flight, reduced to ordinary running. Then he felt he could handle it. Earlier he had already defeated an armored lizard, but this creature outmatched the locals. Monsters, those who arrived and earned. He was told to move to the village while he buys time, but he refused because he knew he couldn't handle that enemy alone. He didn't press and instead began carefully inspecting the combat gear, and suddenly Assad appeared and headed towards the dragon, completely ignoring the wagons. Shouts. Van finally declared that they were not going to leave until Assad was nearby. Assad stopped, but he did not look back, said it could get complicated, then asked Van to do it. Distract the dragon at least once, and they both retreated. He ordered Van to go ahead, but Van did not move when the dragon lunged at them. Asada rushed into the attack to buy them a moment, and then in despair begged him, "FL. But age like sawdust made him too slow. Van extended his prize, he was ready. Red wine to convince him to flee like an oath to test his heart. The artist Kin rushed forward and ordered Van to lead the soldiers to cover the village, while he took care of Asada, returning to the village. Moving fast even at full speed seemed almost impossible. Ordo and his team were exhausted, and he did not know what to do next. Panamera contacted him, saying that she was ready. Van ordered the soldiers, "Prepare for another strike." When Panamera asked about her role, Van was surprised that she saw. Without looking away, he remained focused and told her, "If the dragon approaches the fort, bind it with magic, as before, and then shoot it with the ballista." Panama agreed to that. Although she had never used her magic. Freeze the enemy like that, so what? They were facing a real dragon when the dragon emerged from the ruins forward, then warned everyone on the planet. While Panamera was not ready to use her spell, he needed to save Ferdinand and others just a little time, and D became the one who gave it. His soldiers assured me, "Van, they will handle it." Though somewhat hesitant, they assured him that their equipment made by Van would hold. D and his group began. And their assault on the dragon, these first strikes, even severed one of his fingers, watched as everyone was forced to fall asleep. When all the beasts charged, Asada joined with his own strike. Campson and Asada clashed in a skirmish. They headed to the village and canceled the full retreat. Van could not believe he could move into the village. Despite the pain, they acted this way, especially D, the eldest. This is to get ahead of them all, while the soldiers approached. And Panamera's signal, ready for any command, unleashed her flames. Bursts were fired at B-list. From the western side of the village, CES Darrows flew toward the village. Dragon many missed, but one last one. It was a powerful strike Van ordered them to use. Use every last shot. The dragon indeed weakened, and covered his head with a shield, but the arrows pierced the body, inflicting fatal wounds, then ordered the ballista operators to red. Take a few more shots, wait a bit, and then ask D to inspect. Dragon carefully retreat, and when he lightly tapped his sword on his head, "Sword," growled the dragon, but he failed to dodge, and it all ended. With one move, and he exhaled with relief. He joyfully announced that they had won. To make the final shot and celebrate, cheers of joy erupted when they proved it. Praise triumph till and Arat Rishta. He approached worried and asked if Van was all right, and in response heard that he had just done it. Some rushed along with SBD and his two warriors who had repelled the dragons at the slot. They ran inside and Van sat down to catch his breath. Panamera arrived, praising his decisive orders and congratulating him on the first dragon killed. Ven could not understand how. "I would have gone without her, Asada and D." Panamera was captivated by his sincerity and noticed, "What if that forest?" The dragon struck the prince's lands, half the city, possibly in ruins. The walls at least crumbled, hundreds died. Van froze. If the royal residence was in the city, it would have the strongest defense. Panama noted that D and Asada would go down in history as heroes. The group felt a strong sense of pride, although Panama noted. He realized the ballast was weak, the shots only sliced the dragon's scales, and then he understood that he needed. To give them strength, Panama suggested starting the tribute Dragon Conquest first. She stated that D deserved that. Initially the title of Dragon Slayer, then Van, the village leader, earned the title of Voivode, and Asada was also to be invited to join. He beamed with joy. In the next part, he will finally be called the Dragon Slayer. Van told the crowd that defeated the forest dragon, and those who fought will be honored. Awards will come from the Lord Mara Carla Kian, the current head of the noble Kian family. Peasants eagerly. Everyone held their breath and waited for her speech. She explained that the forestry. The dragon was defeated thanks to the knights and wizards who fought fiercely to save the village. They stopped a threat that could have destroyed the villages and their fortresses strangely, but they were worth it. No one in the village died, a huge success that brought them a wave of praise. She began with the deputy chief knight of the allied family. He grabbed the dragon's head and finally decided the fate of the battle. His deep experience in war and weapons spoke for itself, and then came Sada, a respected mage of the four elements, cast powerful magic to restrain the dragon and thus became the second key player in the battle. Name. And Philo, the fourth son of the same noble family. The crowd erupted. And they chanted for him. He was only 8, but his cleverness, tactics, and wisdom brought invisible magic to the battle. He quickly built and strengthened the village's defense, became the battle's support thanks to incredible planning, and as the village ruler led them to victory, seeing the crowd. They shouted his name. Van blushed and shyly waved in response. Ceremony. It accumulated, but after all, this is a real festival. Immediately after that, Panamera tried the Vancrafted sword and was amazed by its sharpness. She found it hard to believe. Leave that little Van did everything himself. He shrugged and said it was just a basic sword made of ordinary materials. She was stunned he forged hundreds of such swords by hand. Van smiled and offered her a custom one for 5 gold coins, with a panel. The great army of the Mara family, which was rapidly buying up materials, overflowed the warehouse, so he began digging underground. It was half ready when a caravan of street traders on armored lizards arrived, and Lingo came. And froze in amazement, seeing the new look of the village. He began to inquire. Bell said there was a bigger problem to deal with. Van warmly welcomed them, and Lango shared. He pulled in the head of the trading firm. He brought 5 large and 3 medium caravans. Forest Quartz, along with him, led mercenaries reinforced by 20 men and 5 slaves. To show them the new warehouse, he saw everything dragging down. 10 bodies lay on the ground. The merchants were frightened, then decided they had overdone it, but it was a huge forest dragon, and Bell explained everything. Dragon scales, claws, fangs, eyeballs, and magical stones were first class, and if auctioned in the capital, they would fetch at least 100 platinum coins. He even thought they might reach 150. He could not even imagine that a dragon could be worth tens of billions of yen. He asked about what could happen after the post-auction, and with Belle Claire. It was confirmed that this would happen in the capital, where expensive things always surface, attracting the Guild of Traders in mechs along with such units. The items were neat. They would definitely bring at least 150 platinum coins, but there was still the need to pay for delivery and sale, and he wondered if Bell and Lango would still make a solid profit. Bell felt bad. He realized that this could fall on the shoulders of an 8-year-old child. A foolish nobleman could reproach others for not taking the lead, but Van carefully weighed their side, said they would take 3 to 5 platinum coins for themselves and still remain in profit, so it was beneficial for them. Van had to start. It was difficult at the trading firm. Bell was caught off guard. The guard, embarrassed by the question, just stood still. The other traders. He barged in, promising him things. One assertion. They thought of opening a branch in the village after all. They were the most influential trading group in the kingdom. Van doubted whether the village was not too small for this, but the man replied that merchants not only sell, they also buy, offering first-class goods at the best prices, and then Van asked the driver. They said 80 platinum coins. He pressed on what price they would sell him for, and they explained that after deducting their commission, the amount would decrease, and they would still profit. They wanted to sell the armored lizard, then sent people to visit the village. Their chatter constantly revolved around the battle results, and as soon as that subsided, their interest in the village would probably fade, if monsters could. They could be sold. A large store grew here. Traders would cut profits, but he would make a fortune on the dragon and lizards they were not tied to. This place was only about money for them. He thanked them and said. He said he would think it over. They argued that he was too young for merchant games, but Van just waved it off, saying they might have undervalued the dragon. Lango assessed. We decided 100 platinum coins, not 80. The traders wrote it down. He waved it off, saying all traders chase only big profits, and also hinted about bandits on the roads. They would intervene, insisting on justice. Sales in the corral. Expenses must be covered by profits. Even at the base auction price, they would earn a lot, and also a smile. Merchants from market chose only routes without robbers. The senior merchants boiled with Bell's words and called him crazy. They griked the bee. Here every year barely appeared some trader, so 80 platins is a fair fee. Everyone would get at least a coin. Someone offered a large sum to silence him, but Van still heard. I did not expect Bell to refuse here, but Bell refused. He abandoned dark tricks and promised to play fair, believing that honesty would reward generously, and intervened, scolding Bell and warning that the anger of the chief merchant would ruin them. They angrily left. He did not hear a word, although from a noble family. He had heard only good about the merry merchants. Even if the buyer is a simple child who is unlikely to return often, maintaining a warm connection was still the key to preserving relationships with current clients, and Van wondered if they worried about. I lost 1 platinum coin, and they only said it was no trouble. Although everyone knew who they were, to which trading group they belonged, they never found out. Rango felt that they did not deserve death. They were called true merchants. They did not want to judge. A large merchant group, like the one mentioned, prefers to trade independently, hiring security. Bell could transport goods to the capital. They needed to be registered in the guild before the auction, and he explained that 3 things were required to participate: borrow a pile of money for guild membership, have a real own shop, and secure the support of the nobility. The first 2 were easy, but support from the nobility turned out to be much more complicated. The rules of the noble company gave them full legal power. Those who founded the trading firm received rewards from the nobles, while the nobles themselves sat back and reaped the profits, and inquired how much the sale of this drink would cost. Dragon, or what percentage of profit they wanted from each sale. Everyone enthusiastically accepted his decision to join them and agreed on a payment for sales that could vary depending on the market, and when Van asked which noble patron the main merchant group was attached to, the two brothers freeze for a moment. They find. Finally, the truth emerged. They cooperated with the ruler of the country, the Berlin nobility. As soon as the firm was founded, the nobles began recommending it to other nobles for hire. The company grew and strengthened, and by treating customers well, they could maintain a good reputation and noble support. But Van considered it unfair that the crown was on their side. The Merry Company owned shops in all the best corners of the country, so knights could be the first to sell rare materials and slaves they had captured there. They also gained the approval of every lord. Rango threw into the conversation that Mary Triumph, the first head of the Merry Corporation, was allegedly the mistress of an ancient king. Other companies always watch them closely. If someone is caught in a scandal, it can lead to everyone withdrawing their support. Van wondered if the trade guild had connections with large groups in many countries. Their headquarters was in another country, so they reassured themselves, if we follow all the rules, everything will be fine with us. And Belle approved of this, warmly noting that they were able to open the shop only thanks to her support. Belle almost offered her own house, but Van interrupted and explained that he could not count on his family's connections. His father disowned him, and his brother did not have noble status. The only noble person he knew who could help was Panamera, his only ally, and he promised to try to talk to her. This so pleased the merchant brothers that they did not even hear when he clarified that he was only going to ask. He also mentioned Panamera because it could bring her trouble. Van approached Panamera to ask for help, and she immediately agreed without any hesitation. She said that as a new noblewoman she would lose almost nothing by supporting two small matters. Maybe, by pressing a little, they could even shake the kings. Van did not take into account that the kings themselves also had their own problems. He wondered if his experience behind the counter had shaped his thinking. Panamera explained that she had neither land nor a knight order, so if she wanted to rise, she had to make a bold move to attract the attention of the one behind the counter. This request suited her. 100 ordinary soldiers had slain a dragon, and this could be an impressive entrance into the palace. And it was true. No one in the distant villages expected that they could defeat the dragon. Van was delighted when he realized that if Panama took all the glory, his relatives would not notice him. That was exactly what he wanted. She noted that this dragon killing was almost without losses, and any gossip or unnecessary questions would inevitably attract the attention of some higher nobility. If the matter grew, materials would surface, the method of battle, the number of fighters, the place, victims, and other details, and possibly the royal knights would get involved. Van's enthusiasm faded, because even if he said that Panamera killed the dragon, everything would be uncovered, and they would find out it was him, and the thought that they would drag him back home crushed his spirit. Panama was surprised to see a young boy who had just left the house and was so worried, so she came closer and said she would show him how to avoid this. Van looked at her inquisitively when she offered this. He simply became a nobleman to gain independence and establish his own lineage. She spoke about it so easily, as if it were as simple as settling into a new home, even acted out a scene where he defeated a dragon and she did nothing. He panicked, saying it would make him too noticeable. But she just asked what the problem was, and the real thing was that she stood so close that her breasts were right in front of Van's face, although he tried to stay calm. He was not sure if he should chase that power. You could never predict how the father would react. The younger brothers could cause trouble. Becoming a nobleman in the presence of the king's eldest son would definitely attract attention, Panamera insisted. An 8-year-old boy who defeats a dragon would instantly rise in ranks and become wealthy. Plus a growing company, all results are excellent. Yet she still understood why he was nervous. When she became a noblewoman, she made enemies, and some tried to take advantage of her. But she crushed them all. She advised him to strike enemies without mercy, so that after he overthrows a few, no one would dare resist him. Her harsh words made Van see how cruel the world could be. He noted that if he took all the glory for himself, she would get none. Panamera calmly said she did not need an 8-year-old worrying about her life, and Van felt a frightening aura from her and immediately retreated. He now cared more about himself than about her, did not want to fall out of her favor. She laughed and reassured him, "Relax, I won't eat you." The next 5 years, while he was becoming stronger, she allowed him to take all the glory for himself. It seemed Van had only 5 years to manage to leave his mark. In 2 days, he was offered as many as 130 platinum coins for the forest dragon. He immediately agreed without hesitating for a second, and the deal went smoothly. Panama made her condition. As soon as he became a baron, she would take a share of any of his business. When Rango returned to the capital, they sold the forest and armored dragons for materials. Rango warned that their slowness could catch up with them, and Bell was racking his brains on how they could face the merchant guild with nothing to show. Panama was almost sure that the merchants were already calling for help, unable to handle the cargo. If that happened, they would have no choice but to sell everything for 80 platinum coin, strict but practical. Rango suggested making a carriage to transport everything and even asked Koro's squad to guard them, but Penamura stubbornly said she would bring her army to the capital and reminded Van to obtain nobility so he would no longer have to worry about human resources or defense. Van sincerely thanks her, overwhelmed with joy. Seeing him happy for the first time, Panama blushed. She warned him not to blurt out every thought in his head, and Van nearly fainted when he saw her cheeks redden. Bill asked if it would be all right after all. Transporting dragons requires a huge carriage and a bunch of horses, but Van had already taken care of everything. He crafted a huge, light platform carriage from wooden blocks and covered the materials with fabric. And Panama brought trained war horses to pull it. The merchants were still traveling. As they walked, they whispered nastiness about Van and Belle. Suddenly they noticed strange, gigantic carriages and approaching knights. Confused and nervous, they wondered who sent them. It did not look like a noble carriage at all, too huge. When it passed by, they saw an eye. The jar and the quarrel inside it puzzled them even more. One merchant realized and worried. If Belle and Rango gain the support of the nobility, they will quickly rise in the ranks of the merchant guild, and then all their hard work delivering to the border will be in vain. They will be at a loss. Their entire business depended on the armadillo dragon and his 40 things, so returning empty-handed would mean burying their status as merchants, and they racked their brains on how to save themselves. And one even suggested saying that Belle and Rango took advantage of their kindness and deceived them. They are returning, hoping that the guild will believe their story. In the kingdom of Scuteria, Cain Dino from Shura Bellin ascended the throne at 16, and by 20 had turned the army upside down. Having overshadowed his ancestors with incredible strength, he put an end to betrayals, pushed relatives aside, freed many commanders, and turned minor officials into fierce warriors, creating an army that relied on power. It took time, effort, and much blood. Nobles had to become officers or vice-commanders, without any exceptions, and this changed everything. Weaker houses like Count Fonitz gradually lost influence, while militarily strong ones like Mark Fonitz steadily expanded their positions. King Dino himself bestowed the noble title on Panamura. He recognized her skill. She came from a family of knights in the capital, and as soon as her magical gift manifested, she was sent to the council lands for rigorous training. She sacrificed sleep for study and worked tirelessly. Her efforts finally bore fruit. She became the captain of a small team, and thanks to her successes, by the age of 16 she commanded the Count's knights. Since then Panamura achieved much. She joined the war against the kingdom of Veneta, where her leadership turned the tide of the conflict, and after that she was made a noblewoman. They hid behind granting the title, but in reality used her as their knight. His Majesty was delighted with her successes, and within 6 years awarded her the rank of this count. He said that, considering her recent exploits, he expected she would ask for an even higher rank herself. But she stunned him by suggesting to give it to someone else. The king asked who this person was, whom she recommended. Panamura explained that it was one of the feudal lords of the kingdom, a man without a deputy or representative, who cannot come to the capital, and when the king asked why she was nominating such a lord, she replied that she did it for his future potential and the achievements he could reach. The king jumped for joy that such a respected military figure as she praised someone, but soon doubts crept in about the lord, whose land was barren, had no knights, and not a single soldier. How could he have done something truly remarkable? When Panama said it was the dragon's subjugation, silence fell in the room. They wondered if a mage of the 4 elements had grown there, but she quickly corrected. He could not cast spells, although his family was famous for magic. That's why he was expelled. King's curiosity instantly flared when she named him. And then his companion appeared, son of Mari's fellow, an 8-year-old hero who had already killed a dragon. The king froze in shock. Marcus had not reported this, but Panama said she had spoken herself with Van and the villagers. It happened in a tiny village with barely 100 people, constantly harassed by thieves, and when Van arrived, he defended it, defeating the bandits with just a few comrades and hired adventurers. Then he fortified the village with clay ramparts and repaired their broken houses. The court simply did not believe that a 6-year-old child could do such a thing. But Panama did not stop, listing her small team. A little over 100 peasants, Mark vice-captain of the knights, an elderly mage, and 5 adventurers, although she helped subdue the dragon by restraining it. It was Van and the feudal Lord Bono who finished it, and in doing so lost not a single person. It sounded incredible, so they demanded proof. Panama was assigned to the dragon materials. And also 40 armored lizards, a number that shocked them. Even royal knights would hardly be able to easily handle such a crowd. She admitted that in that fierce dispute she could not fully convince them, but then she spoke with the villagers she led, and their stories matched the report. The king did not think Panama was lying, but he was surprised that she believed a child so easily swayed. They asked if someone had given Van his land, and she confirmed it. He added that in a few days there would be a dragon inspection, so there was no need to complicate anything, and the knight sternly warned her. If this turned out to be a trick, she would lose her title and be punished. Panama agreed to take the risk, and even asked the king to come, hinting that he could give Van the new lands for the sake of protecting the kingdom. The king eagerly awaited the meeting with Van in the form of a dragon. They brought the dragon, and the people froze in admiration. Panama declared Van a fellow baron, and his rewards for destroying the forest dragons would be decided later. In the courtroom, everyone was shocked, especially because of the new Van. She also informed Belle and Rango that now they could deal with the guild and start their business. Rango jumped for joy, and when Panama asked if he also used his brother's name, he said he was simply glad. His little brother's name was starting to spread. The next day, the launch of the new business and whispers that Van Fellow would become a baron exploded as the loudest sensation in the entire capital. People praised Van as a hero who defeated the dragon, and wild tales claimed that the young mighty swordsman cut off its head. Sounds too incredible even for rumors. The role of Panamarie was in the shadows, but it did not bother her. The noise around the van also enchanted her. She hoped so much that he would be grateful for her help. A month and a half ago, Panama's group left the village, and since then Van has made a lot of ballast with only about 100 inhabitants. They can't use them all, but his house became luxurious and moved to the center of the village, because it is both more convenient and more pleasant. And they also built 2 towers. Ken madly loved the Eringo Tower for its views of the street, and Till preferred the Voodoo Tower for the lake views. They removed surveillance from the van and asked if he was heading to Eringo Tower, but since the van chose that one, he instead switched to Voodoo. The ascent to the tower took 10 minutes and exhausted them completely. Common handled it without problems. But Till's van rabbit. When they reached the top, the stunning view justified all their efforts. Van wondered if this tower was too much for a village of only 100 people, until someone noticed that with their buildings and equipment, it no longer looked like a village. Maybe it should be called a town. Although he had previously rejected Van's village, this name still circulated, and he thought that Till might jokingly call it Van Town. Till was not afraid of Van's teasing tone and insisted that it was a great name. Van thought she was teasing him now. Let's call Van. Let him look at this. Van did not notice this. Kin with sharp eyes saw better than the peasants and said that they did not look like soldiers or adventurers. Among them were many children, elderly people, and even a slave trader. Shocked, Van decided to eat first. It was still an hour to the place. Till brought Van's favorite egg rolls and a sandwich on very good bread, thanks to Belle. And has 8 Alti already appeared. Panamura returned to the capital, but Alti decided to stay for now. Van asked what was happening. Almost losing formality, he felt like an adult talking to a child. She was so sweet, although he had no romantic feelings. He just wanted to pat her on the head when she behaved like that. He was so touched by her sweetness that he barely heard Alti ask to just call her Alti, because the full title was difficult for him. Van agreed and asked why she had come. She explained that the crowd was coming towards them, and she was worried, not knowing what to do. Within the city walls, they had nothing. If they were taken to his office, Van noticed that her speech became more relaxed. She gradually opened up to him, although from time to time she still got irritated. Van suggested talking in the house, and first making sure that the newcomers were friendly, but Till said that morning Oro's squad had gone into the forest. Van Toland sets out to pick up Dee and Asada. Common went to pick them up. Van thought about training among his construction projects, driven by Ken's persistent work. He can endure these harsh trainings on his own. And although he himself did not realize it, his swordsmanship surpassed Van's. Ob and Lou also trained his opponents, and Van wondered if he was lacking something besides stamina. When general skills out a prize, then he realized that, as at home, the cool ones here are those who are fast and athletic. Asada told Van that this group was from another village and offered to bring their leader to his room. A sweaty man appeared and asked if this was Seat Village. They expected a simple place but froze in surprise, seeing instead a magnificent city. Then he turned to Asada and asked if he knew anything about it. Asada explained that once a man named Sit lived here, who left such a mark that the village began to be called Sit's Village. Van froze in amazement. He felt deceived because he was told the village had no name. Asada admitted that he had been silent, hoping Van would name it Van's Village himself, and could not understand what was wrong with that boy. Asada confirmed that this really is Seat Village. Van asked what that man wanted. Still recovering from how much had changed, it seemed almost unbelievable. Losing patience, Van exploded and shouted, demanding to know why he was here. The man said they were from a neighboring village where almost no young people remained, and the taxes were the same. They could no longer live like that, so they came to ask if they could join the sea village. The word migration sounded eerie, and Van wondered why they were losing youth. He asked if they had left for money, but instead they decided to stay here. The man explained that the younger ones did not go voluntarily, they were conscripted into the army. They were abandoning their village, not having enough people to pay taxes, and the count did not care about a border place like theirs. Van noted that their villages seemed very far from each other, and the man explained that for an adult to travel here takes 2 weeks, so they chose this village instead of the city, fearing the count's punishment if he caught them, and decided that the viscount's village here was safer. If the count had been more cautious, he would not have let them in. It might have seemed that Van was taking his people, and that could have caused problems, but these people risked their lives to get here, and Van did not want to quarrel with the count or his family, but he could not just pass by those who needed help. Van asked if they all intended to live here, and assured that for now he would not collect taxes from them. They have food and a roof over their heads, and they could unite to help the village. Only 13 came today, although there are 300 in total. He warned that each family would get only one house, so they should not expect too much. The man who asked Van was confident he could take good care of them, even offered his grandson, and this drove Van mad. He was fiercely outraged that children were being abandoned like holiday gifts, and although he knew that feudal lords often gave away daughters, it still disgusted him. Van offered to lend them carts and asked if 2 horses would be enough, but the man refused, saying they could manage with the cows they had at home. His curiosity jumped when he heard about the cows. The man explained that the count left them these animals to raise, and they gave birth to 5 or 6 cows each year, eventually growing to about 10 per year. Van was glad and said they could bring the cows here, and Ordo would accompany them. He suggested the village head rest today because he thought he was very tired. But the man said he was not the head. People could not believe that one could fall asleep in such a place. Some said it was even grander than the feudal lord's estate. While others guessed that the lord might have lent it, Van knew that his furniture was much better. He interrupted and announced a welcome banquet and a trip to the large bathhouse. He told Cayman to inform the villagers and accompany the cook. I will ask what he has planned for them, and Van realized that she is the daughter of the count. He did not want to cause any problems at all, and sincerely explained that the villagers from the nearby place simply could not stay there. So for now, he offered food and a roof over their heads. Lift said with relief that they would have a good life here, and Van was glad that she did not inquire about their origin while they walked together. He asked if she liked these 2 months here and if she wanted to stay. Halty said that she would be happier here. Van noted that they were still children, so talks about marriage could be forgotten. Just let her say what she wants. That was the main thing. Although Alti was nervous, she said she would gladly marry him. Then he jokingly asked Alti if she really wanted to marry him, flattering her and hoping to embarrass her even more. But he considered himself a gentleman who would never humiliate a lady. So he told her to drop that idea, and everyone agreed. Then he noticed that his chances were being tested. Van waved it off, calling it a fun walk, saying guys feel like they are in 7th heaven when they become popular. At that very moment, the wounded Oro team burst into the village. Orto nervously reported that they had found the entrance to the dungeon in Van Fruzi. Here it is exactly what he had been trying with all his might to avoid. Everything was filled with yellow birds, strange merchants, and little monsters. Asada leaned on Van and warned that since they had discovered this, they needed to immediately report to the capital. He asked if his father would catch them if they did not do so. And Van admitted it was clear the first step really was to inform the royal capital. Van had previously dreamed of becoming a noble so that his land would gain fame, but now they were stuck. He began making plans, a branch for adventures or a guild department, shops with armor, and since this attracted ruffians, maybe also a host club and a casino. Ordo sincerely and long apologized. But Van said that now that it was found, it could no longer be avoided, and he wanted someone to go to the capital with that news and chose Huru for this task. Heuristic was nervous about having to go alone, but Van smiled and said that he had found the dungeon anyway thanks to his curiosity. So he could not complain. Orth agreed Kura was flawless, but still wanted to join. Van insisted that he stay to guard the peasants who were arriving and instead handed over a large gold coin. As soon as they spoke about gold, the group threw Kira and wished him luck. Seeing Kira's gloomy face, Van handed him a mithril dagger. When the others saw this, they instantly changed. Suddenly, they passionately wanted to go themselves. Ordo and the team set out to escort the new settlers, while Ku rushed to the royal capital. Kura finished the journey and, holding the new daggers, enchantedly admired the sunset. Glad Van gave it to him. Using it turned out to be extremely simple. He spent the night in the camp, and the next day the road flew by. He kept his eyes fixed on the blade the whole time, and was only a few kilometers from the capital. Suddenly he noticed the carriage was being attacked by an orc. Orcs no matter what they were like. They were driven by primitive impulses, hunger, sleep, desire, and violence. He guessed that this thing would either wound or attack whoever was inside. Without the dagger it would have been much harder. Akira now considered it child's play. He effortlessly laid down the orcs. He even warned the others to retreat for their own good, and then finished them off. Again thrilled by the advanced custom mithril dagger. A tiny girl with eyes full of gratitude stepped out of the carriage, and sincerely thanked him for saving her. Her name was Amelia Staist. She decided that there was some influential person in front of her, and immediately asked his name. Kira got scared and called himself a simple traveler, but his fine clothes and that noticeable dagger made her suspicious. She decided that he was hiding a famous name, and although he tried to explain, she did not believe him. She said that she had walked from here to the royal capital and now could not repay him, but promised to do so later. Kira said he was going to the capital and offered to give her a ride on his horse. She did not want to burden him, but he was already helping her onto the horse, joking that the horse would rather choose a lady like her than him. Amelia was touched and said that it had been an eternity since someone called her lady. She was 30. Kira did not believe it. She looked no older than 20. He asked where she was going. She quietly explained that her escort had left her on the way. Kira asked Amelia why she was heading to the capital. She sadly explained that her father, Count Vi, had died in battle. Their estate was taken away, and the family lost its status now. She was looking for a home where maids might be needed. She was ashamed to admit it, but Kira was not one to judge. He thought she was a freelancer like himself, told her he lived in a border village, and invited her, saying there would be good work there and he would look after the place. Amelia was glad to see Kira and gladly accepted his offer. They hurried to the Adventurers Guild and excitedly told about the dungeon they found near the border. Under the lands of Marcus Fellow, the guild announced that it is very close to the same village that defeated the forest dragon and armored lizards. The feudal Lord Van Fellow was the new baron, and the guild is going to open its branch there. I buy materials with a 20 markup. Whoever makes a truly useful dungeon map will receive a reward. The adventurer is delighted, pestering Cure with questions about Van and the dungeon. Cure grabbed Amelia and said they were leaving. They wandered the capital until it was time to depart, and the travelers, despite orders not to follow, still went after them. Cure brought Amelia food to her room. She felt bad for only accepting his help, but he shrugged and asked if she was sure she would join him. Amelia said she hadn't smiled so sincerely in a long time, and it was all thanks to him. Cure beamed with a smile and began talking about Van, praising him as a clever guy with great potential. Amelia was glowing with impatience. She wanted to meet him and see the village he talked about. Meanwhile, Orto and his team are leading neighboring villagers to the village of Vans. The figure-shaped Cure set out straight for the capital, and Periel warned them to stay alert after the trouble with the forest dragon. Last time they talked too much. Ordo tried to object, but Puril just shut him up. They were struck by the number of villagers, and even more shocked that everyone wanted to go. Ordo saw people dying, never seeing anything beyond their own village, and yet they endured hunger. The trimming turned out to be difficult. He noticed a woman who was swaying but stubbornly refused the carriage. She had more character than those sitting in the carriage. He asked if she was all right. She admitted that she was against this step. He expected a worse village, even though he assured her that this border village was a true paradise, better than any city. She did not quite understand it yet, but when they arrived, he stretched out his hand and pointed to the walls. They were all covered with flooring. The villagers regretted during the festival with warm smiles, including the wagons. He realized they were exhausted, so he suggested organizing a barbecue to rest and bond in their assigned houses. Spell, the village head, sincerely thanked Van for sheltering them. Van introduced himself and praised Orto for feeding everyone. Orto said it was just an adventure or work, period, if the meat was from another monster. Van said that just last night 10 giant evil boars appeared. He froze in panic, seeing them approaching. Orton warned that these boars paralyze with magic if you get too close. But their ballast cut them down with one blow. A little boy from the neighboring village asked if he could eat. And Van told him to wait and asked till to bring the same soup he had mentioned and to fry a few small pieces of meat for him. They served mountains of food to everyone. The newcomers were so happy that they shone, some even teared up while eating, finally savoring juicy meat after such a long time. Seeing their joy, warmth also filled the hearts of Van and his fellow villagers. Van sighed with relief. He had put in a lot of effort to prepare enough houses and barbecues for 300 people before their arrival, and with the support of his team, especially Pill, he did most of the work. Now he only had to plan the outskirts for adventurers. He imagined a small town beyond the village, not for defense, but as a stopover for those who go into dungeons, and thought it would be a good place to keep criminals and suspicious types away from the village. He planned to build the town in about a month, and Orda Listen was amazed when Van described a town for 400 people with an atmosphere for travelers and adventurers. Tall buildings would accommodate dozens of people, including 5 for business and 2 or 3 within 5. The 100-meter walls were armed with 3 ballistas, and he planned to increase their number to 15 for defense, all locked so no one would misuse them. Asada noticed that a branch of the Adventurers Guild was heading there, so it was clear. Van was preparing the town specifically for them. It was just a conversation, but he was troubled by the question, would Van himself take charge of the shops and small matters? Van replied that if they handled it themselves, they would earn more. It would require work, but it was worth it. Asada advised having a representative, because Van was already taking care of the village. Someone had to look after the town, and asked if that meant one person had to watch all the shops, or if several shopkeepers could take on the task. Asada suggested dividing it among several people. In the quarrel, someone also threw in, we could create a night army with a D nearby, and with transport and a base. They could handle the security of the town. Thieves or hooligans might appear, so Van decided to run a few shops himself, and trust the rest to Bell and Rango, and look for adventures for the night army. He proposed one aspect of the role of representative. Managing the set of talents, Van asked if one army could cover both the village and the city. He was confident that D would lead the Seat Village's army, and the new one would become the Aspa army. Sada understood and asked if it was revenge, and Van checked the company, hoping that no fights had broken out. Eric really wanted to join him, but Van had to talk to the villagers, and to avoid seeming rude, he handed her some meat while they talked. Dylan Campion followed them with admiration, enchanted watching them eat and walk. Van noticed there were not enough chairs, and asked a strong villager to bring 3. He gladly brought them. And Van offered him to join the Seat's knight armor. I am still working on it. I asked him to think it over carefully. I am proud that I recruited earlier than Estbu, and then took on the iron of other types of warriors. The villagers approached, eyes full of anxiety, and asked how they could help. He, delighted with the extra hands, assigned them to help in the shops and inns. They were skilled in the field, but novices in trade, so Van assured that they would serve customers, arrange goods, and clean. There was enough work for everyone to try what suited them. He promised everyone an honest wage. The old man said with a smile that the village was in excellent condition, and even thought he had come to the wrong place until the van appeared. They could not even imagine a life full of smiles and joy, but they fervently hoped it would last. Van said this was only the beginning. They would make every day fun together. The village was growing. More and more residents and guests appeared, although at first they were only trying to survive. It was announced grandly that another town was being built right now. In the next scene, they gathered even more villagers to help, and the strongest worked a kilometer from the village, building a new town for adventurers. SB noticed that it was uneven, so they ordered them to pull the rope to the right. Van entrusted the elderly newcomers to take care of the cows on the farm, a job they knew well, and Agalis gave the cows water and grass. The new kids were delighted. They happily settled into their homes and ran with Sita's children to explore the towering walls of the village, and Van was glad that the number of people was increasing. Someone approached and asked if more firewood was needed. Van requested another 100 by the end of the day and noticed that D was already gathering the night squad. Although they had already signed up for SB, Van realized he had fallen behind, but fortunately, some had not yet decided. He managed to pick up a few and planned to make D the captain, and Ob and Lou the deputies of the 20-person squad. It was small, but he told himself to relax and let Asada rest. Ken ran in, reporting that a horse and a medium carriage were visible in the distance. It was Kusara, followed by several others, and Van thanked him, joking that he shouldn't have looked so far ahead. Dylan Alti also couldn't notice this until they got closer, and only then did a woman appear next to Kusara. They'll seem to have saved her and won her heart. Alti was impressed, and even Kin praised Kusara for agility, the ability to spot enemies, disarm traps, unique sword skills, and also for the ability to throw stones, throw knives, and shoot a bow. While they chatted about Kusara, he rolled up and jokingly asked them not to speak badly about him so loudly. Van pretended to be innocent, greeted him warmly, and inquired about the woman. Kusara replied that he had seen her somewhere before, and since she had nowhere to go, took her with him. The number of peasants was growing, and he asked if that was normal, and when Van mentioned 300 new residents, Kusara simply froze. Till introduced herself as Van Tafalia, who bore the same name, and told that near the capital she was attacked by orcs, but Kusara saved her and brought her here just as Till had predicted. Kusara pretended it was unimportant, but Philly stubbornly insisted that he shone brighter than any hero from a fairy tale. Till and the whole buzz with excitement. Then pay attention to the group behind Kusara. Adventurers burning with desire to get to work. After Kusara went to the guild and told everything, he apologized and these money-hungry people stuck to him. Fearing they would scare the villagers, he offered them to spend the night outside the village, but Van wanted their favor and kind words about the village. He asked them to hold on and wait, assuring that he would soon send ins with basic defense, told Kusara to stay in the village and rest, and asked about their plans. Van explained that Ordo was scouting in the dungeon, but due to its precarious location, the camp could be forgotten. Kusara Grind said this was his moment to shine. Today a subordinate, and tomorrow he will show his skills. Kusar weighing. Philly bowed gracefully, as if hinting at her noble origin, and apologized. Alti whispered that she was from the house of Viscount Stratos. Van asked if she knew Philia, and Alti replied that she had heard of her. Her father, an aristocrat, had died. Their family, barely holding on, finally fell apart till fell silent with pity, thinking they were probably about the same age. But when Alti said that Philia was in her 30s, everyone froze. Van decided it was better not to ask women about their age. He switched to the town layout, postponed the shops for later, and primarily set up temporary shelters and defensive walls. He wanted a wall strong enough to stop a medium-sized monster and give everyone time to retreat deeper into the village trouble hit. While he was speaking, several adventurers approached them and started to hassle. They warned that even near the village, the street was dangerous. They called them brats and flirted with Till and Alti, which made Van freeze for a moment at their impudence. Then they asked Till if she was worried. She said they were strange but pleasant. Van was afraid of them, but others explained that the White Oath group, although rough in appearance, was honorable at heart. Van decided that White Oath was just the name of the D-Day crew party. The travelers were curious why they were here, but Van reassured them at the first sign of danger, they would immediately return to the village, so everything would be fine. It heard from the guild about a young, wealthy VI account who leads a large group. Van looked with interest at that young and skillful noble. He had never heard of him. When some adventurer asked what he did, Van replied that he was waiting for firewood. He showed their meager supplies, and despite their rough appearance, he hastily built a temporary fence so the night would pass safely. Everyone gasped, and Van, thinking they did not believe in its strength, explained that it was stronger than it seemed and would stand for a week, but they corrected him. It was incredible magic. Placing 30 logs and shouting Van's name, he made the adventurers understand that this boy was Van Fellow. Degat Furios drew his sword and loudly challenged to a duel. Even Van was scared. Travelers demon egg, but cut their swords in half. In one stroke, he was known as the strongest knight who killed dragons, and his fame spread quickly. The newcomers greeted him warmly and nervously, and he warned them not to look for trouble. Van did not know how to feel, but hoped this would keep everything safe. People were drawn to Van both as to a child and as to a leader, bombarding him with questions. He was at the border. He explained that he was expelled from the family. Ordo appeared in the middle of the conversation, surprised by the crowd. Van asked when he had returned. Ordo replied that they had stayed too long in the dungeon but finally came back. He wondered how many adventurers were here and whether Kusara had returned, and Van recalled the stunning woman he had brought, shocking the team. Kusara and Philia arrived. Kusara came to check on them. They were late, and he said the guild staff would come for an inspection within a day, so tomorrow they would set out for reconnaissance. Philia called him and he explained her presence, introducing her to his adventurer friends. Kusara wanted to help, but seeing them, instead headed back to the end. Orto and the others were in shock, asking if this was not a dream. Van told how Kusara heroically saved her from orcs. She saw a true hero in him and it was true, so Van accepted them and even thought about a small hut nearby for them. Their envious reactions made him stop. They regretted missing envy Kusara. Settling in, they immediately inquired about the dungeon. Imperial said the monster remained inside, and the entrance near the cliff was treacherous even for the forest. It was deep with a narrow opening through which only two could pass. They peered inside. Stairs led to the first floor. Columns stood on the sides, walls and ceiling surrounded them, and here and there crystals of light flickered, and it was definitely a dungeon. Van asked Puril if the dungeon was far, and she replied that it was an hour by carriage, and then another 2 to 3 hours through the forest. Van was stunned, but thought that dungeons were often like that, probably fierce monsters gathered at the border away from safer places. He thought that no village would be settled in such a risky place, but nearby, he still saw a chance that a settlement might one day grow there. Period warned, huge monsters swarm around the dungeon, and its natural structure is treacherous. A small camp can still be set up, but a full-fledged base cannot be established here. The tone of her voice confused Van. She was strangely confident and claimed that he could build a perfect base there. Van countered that the power was too wild for his ballast. Puril swore she would protect him, boasting that her team's experience in dungeons made it safe. She pushed suspiciously hard, but Van, wanting to be cautious, was not convinced. He jokingly said he would go only if carried to the entrance, added about afternoon naps and desserts, and asked permission to take with him the servants Tilla, Kina, and Althea's. Diana Sada would be busy with the town, so he would need many guards. He thought Krapka would refuse, but she smiled and promised to prepare for tomorrow. This stunned Van. She told Orto that they were taking Van and that he should get ready. Even the servants who were eavesdropping just froze. It had already been 3.5 hours since they left the village. And suddenly he found himself chained to the dungeon to set up a base there, something he had never imagined. He was gazing at the landscape, while Alti enthusiastically praised the fresh air. Although that shaking simply could not be unnoticed. Their goal was the dungeon, and they had to gather 50 adventurers. They were riding on a light shrine platform crafted by Van, but the shaking was such that it seemed they would be thrown out at any moment. Beyond the forest passed caves, cliffs, and scattered corpses, which had now become part of the landscape. When Van muttered that he did not expect this, Common reminded him that he himself had agreed to it. Van was struggling with motion sickness, and the girls treated it as if it were a fun road trip. The distant mountains rising above the clouds impressed them, and the flying monster left them with their mouths agape. Van felt a threat and instantly grabbed the crossbow in case it suddenly descended. Hearing his name, he looked out and he immediately shouted for everyone to stop. 2 wooden planks served as a bridge and he froze in horror. Confused, they asked why he stopped them so close to the dungeon. Van shouted to move them to a wider place. I was stunned by the traveler's recklessness. Even high-rise workers here would tremble. He realized, adventure is rarely valued above safety. And order them to remove that deadly trap where one step can kill, not to forget to emphasize the danger and risk management. The travelers exchanged surprised glances, unsure if they had such an impression he made them kneel. They reconsidered their approach because they could not understand the essence of the problem. Seeing how Kusara was jumping around, he then asked what he was doing. And what will happen if he hits the log hard? He warned that even someone like Gilus Kusara might lose it if the boards start to roll or break. Ven ordered either to reinforce the bridge or find a safer route, and asked what to do with the log. Someone suggested laying more logs for this. Ven made them kneel again and scolded them for their foolishness. He stubbornly insisted that the correct solution was a strong bridge, and insisted on checking security before crossing. They grumbled about the lack of time, but when Van threatened to leave the base if they kept whining, they immediately got down to business, and he glanced at the entrance to the dungeon squeezed between cliffs and hills, a cramped, very inconvenient place for a base, till asked what was bothering him. But even before he could answer, the man sharply interrupted him and asked to point out important objects. When Van inquired, the man suggested a hostess club, and he was immediately shot. Van prepared food again. At the casino, there was no need to explain, either convincing people was extremely difficult. He took on the task, built a door to the dungeon, and installed a water supply system from the river. He planned to place the base near the entrance on a convenient slope that would smoothly connect everything. Alti asked if he had finally decided on this design, and he assured her that he had. After 4 continuous bursts of power, the foundation was ready. As soon as Van gave the go-ahead, everyone rushed inside. On the lower floor, there was a resting corner and a storage room. On the first floor, a dining room and 3 bedrooms, and on the 3rd and 4th floors, 6 more bedrooms. Built with balance in mind, it was incredibly sturdy. They could use the terrace as they pleased. The travelers were simply amazed by this arrangement. On each floor, as many as 4 toilets. On the roof stood tanks with mesh filters for rainwater, but he warned it was not to be drunk. He handed the helm to Orto and asked him to manage affairs properly. Regarding the dungeon doors, keep them closed when possible, or set opening hours. Orto suggested consulting with the groups at some dove at night. They agreed it should be closed when empty, to at least delay the moment when something bad breaks through. The mithril interior could hold back a forest dragon for a day. Steel bars on the windows, there was no need to fear monsters. More windows would have made the room brighter, but he advised closing them when not in use. It was noon, so Van said they should return and ordered to prepare escorts. The traveler, surprised by the daylight, first wanted to take a nap, but Van noticed that his curfew had come. I saw it with you, I am going. They laughed. The master was afraid of his servant's anger after all. Despite the title, he was still a child. Van Gotstern warned that there would be no lunch if they dawdled. This only made them laugh louder and tease him more. On the way back, they came across another cliff. Then they could not understand how they crossed it. It was a deadly trap. Having built 2 more bridges, they left the forest and finally reached the village just as the sun began to set. Then they noticed next to a spa stood a bottle of soda. At least once instead, the soda smiled. His usual empty gaze, which scared Van. Asada asked to talk alone, but the frightened Van pleaded for help, while the others could not even meet Asada's gaze. Til boldly followed, although Kamen and Alti refused. Then lure Ortho to intervene, accusing them of this mess. But some sawtass, muffled Ortho, pulled Van away. He scolded him until midnight. In the next scene, an untidy market raged on the outskirts of the capital. The girl who could not control the four elements was stuck with household chores, singing and dancing. Hunters like her were driven to the worst conditions because more and more lots were being sold off. The market buzzed with rumors that some man was buying all the lots, and someone offensively noted that he was spoiled, and several of them could become his lovers. But they all headed to the distant mountain to make a living there. The girl wondered whether she would ever find meaning there or simply perish. Meanwhile, in Sit Village, a caravan rolled into the adventurers' town. Rango returned a crowd, followed him on horseback, then, and imagined a sincere, brotherly reunion. The bell sharply interrupted and asked Rango, "For how much were you sold?" Rango reported 108 platinum coins, and after thinking ahead bought 150 debt tiles all in order, and their 20s are younger. Though stunned, he paid 3 platinum for each, ultimately giving 8 large gold coins. At the auction in Maria's guild, Rango tried to talk about carriages, but the guild apologized, saying that if they couldn't trade inside, it would be a big hassle, so prices were cut in half. Van greeted Ringo, noticed a large company. Ringo promised to introduce them later. "I hand over 130 platinum coins," as agreed. Van thanked him, passed them to Till, and Rango added 2 more platinum coins and promised a share of future profits while Van shared. Van sincerely thanked, and Rango promised to first sell him materials from monsters. Everyone seemed mutually beneficial, but suddenly Rango dropped a bomb. Van is now officially a baron. He remained stunned. Father could no longer return the land or deprive him of power. Ken asked if Panama would come alone, but Rango said that Count Vi would hurry here as soon as he reports to another count. She would rather side with Van than with the Count's faction. She was eager to develop this land, and Van did not expect her to want to settle here. He liked her, but not as a boss, so everything became very shaky. Next, in the village square, they interviewed the newcomers, who showed their outstanding talents. The daughter of the former Count Vi, a former knight, the daughter of a knight, the wielder of wind power, the wielder of earth power, a former B-rank adventurer, the daughter of a fallen company director, and a former knight from a hostile nation. Since 2 stood out with the power of wind and earth, they were asked about magic. The blonde said she could mold muddy walls, and the others could deal with wolves and creatures with a single strike. The blonde from a merchant family said that since childhood she had kept trade accounts and managed a shop. They wanted to hire her if Van agreed, and Van wondered if her beauty had enchanted them. Bell suggested that if they opened a weapons shop at the entrance to the City of Adventures Spa, it would sell well and could be handed over to that blonde. Then they met Veda, a former child from a noble family. Then asked the sheep, where would they rather work, in a tavern with knights or in the Lord's Hall? As a cleaner, she learned from a kind maid named Till. Veda chose cleaning, and Van found her incredibly cute. She reminded him of Harem, a servant from his old house. He even thought of making her his secretary, but in the end decided that was enough. Suddenly Veda sends something away. It darted away, taking only a crumb of food, so this kindness seemed strange. When Van suggested working all nights for the town, she was shocked. No one had even heard that Slavs would become knights. Van explained that this area was teeming with monsters and full of dangers, but he believed that if they did their job well, they could protect the peasants. Veda had never heard that Slavs could become knights. Now, she understood why the others were so happy. She could not comprehend why this was happening. Van Lip felt relieved when everyone was assigned roles, and the knights fell to their knees, swearing to serve him. But he firmly explained that he did not intend to enslave them. He just wanted them to work for the village, settle down, and find a purpose worth pursuing. He passionately urged them to strive together. Tears welled up in Veda's eyes when she said that these were slabs. But he spoke as if they could live an ordinary life. Van replied that as the master of the village, they were all his people. We are created to care for one another. Veda finally found the meaning of her life. Whatever the task, as long as she could return here, she would put all her strength into it. Van decisively announced, in builders and mages to Asada, and former knights, mercenaries, and adventurers to D. Due to the population boom, the village buzzed like a beehive. For bards, dancers, and musicians, they built a pub to then hire them and entrusted the fields to Saudi agrarians. And children up to 10 years old were taken to help with laundry and sent to school. The Belgian Association taught Nubai business, dividing the carriages into 3 teams to expand their coverage, and sent everyone to the royal capital by Rango Stein. For about 50 newcomers, Van is going to train them as guards, starting with the night squad, and he will teach them to wield a powerful automatic crossbow like archers. Veda, a former hunter named Bora, said she uses a bow, and many did not even question her choice. Van explained that at first he chose by experience, then by keen eyesight, and finally by small stature, which does not suit swords and armor. It was a warning: bows are no joke, they are not simple, and weak children without strength in their hands will really struggle. Interested in her intuition, Vanagrid chose the weakest-looking 11-year-old hunter to check what heat the light bow emits. He handed it to Bull, telling her to relax her shoulders and aim at the forest. She shot for the first time and pressed on him. Returning to the group, he asked if everyone wanted to try the new bow. Bora, trembling with excitement, went first and was simply amazed by its quality, exclaiming that it could take down a high-class monster. Van said they had a ballista, so a bow was not needed, but a spark lit up in Bora's eyes. She desperately wanted to see the ballista. Van worried that she might cause trouble. He was going to appoint an experienced captain, but now doubted if Bora was suitable. For safety, he handed command to Kamen, confident that he would manage. After that, he enthusiastically dived into studying the crossbow together with them. He worked and then just chatted. Thinking about how to simplify this for users, Alti watched as he muttered to himself. And noticed it seems he likes it. Van agreed mechanics and politics were complicated, but it was insanely fun. He never ceased to be amazed by whoever invented crossbows. Although something got stuck, and he suspected that something elastic was needed, the stick wouldn't budge. So he checked if metal parts would come in handy. Alti muttered in surprise about Van making bets he overheard, and she blushed and apologized. Van laughed and honestly admitted that he had made many mistakes. He was proud only of magic, but Alti disagreed. She sincerely praised his swordsmanship and training as true talents, while she herself, confessing envy, thought she had nothing. Then she was offered to contact the demonic leader in Captain to train and catch up with him, and for some reason this made her giggle. Interested, he asked what kind of magic she possessed. The question was ordinary, but she trembled with nerves. She was reassured. Until the next message, the wagon would not rush her, and she could skip it if it was difficult. Alti insisted on answering, and revealed that she possessed doll magic. This power scared everyone. Alongside Kina's thefts and his brainwashing magic, hers was called the weapon of cowardly sinners after that old incident. People immediately considered the killers puppets and suspected doll magicians, even when detection magic was active. Compared to his feudal magic, he finally felt her hesitation. He asked what she could do with it. Van desperately wanted to know if she was ready to share. Hiding it forever would be unbearable. Alti panicked, calling it dangerous, but Van wanted to support her, hoping she would eventually be proud of it. She carefully took out the doll she had hidden and hesitated whether to show it to him. With her strength, the doll stood up, and Van asked if it could move. She said yes, and it instantly started to dance. Van froze. He was struck by those precise, almost human steps without any unnecessary movement. When it was all over, he, with a glow in his voice, praised her incredible potential. Till agreed, everyone was enchanted by the magic and asked if Alti also danced. Alti admitted that she could, but she was best at puppeteering, and it shocked the wagons. Because that meant the doll obeyed her better than her own body. An incredible skill to control movements and still do it perfectly. It was clear that Alti's magic could be twisted and used for evil. But her behavior silently said that no one had shown her its good side. Till came up with a brilliant idea to make cute dolls for Alti, so they would animate them during festivals and delight the villagers. Alti said she could move dolls her own height, although she had never dared to try bigger ones. They couldn't wait to try it, so Van crafted a unique doll for her, until asked out of curiosity why she was holding a sword and shield in a dress. Van Grand explained that although it danced beautifully in a dress, he still added weapons just in case. The mithril doll and its equipment were so reliable that they were easy to handle. Unlike usual wooden or leather shields, he smiled. He thought to himself that he would need more mithril for future dolls. When he finished, Alti giggled for the first time and they both shuddered. Van thought it was because of the shield and suggested removing it, but that was not the reason. Till suggested exchanging it for an umbrella, and Alti nodded, but Till immediately backed off, saying she shouldn't have agreed. Van and Alti exchanged glances and burst out laughing. It was her first truly sincere laugh. After that warm moment when they tested the doll, Alti's control was simply amazing. Even the smallest movement was flawless. When Den turned around to praise her, he saw her gasping, clutch her chest, and stagger. He caught her and asked if she was okay. She quietly admitted that she had spent too much mana for a mithril doll. She needed more than usual. Making the man feel a shortage, they laid her down and gave her water. Van did not know about the mana limit and did not expect it. He suspected mithril and decided to reduce its mana requirement. The week of Altai passed in elation, all thanks to Van and Till. She always felt worthless, but now she decided to find her meaning. Then until he smiled with relief. He asked if she would study her magic with him, because he believed that together they would reveal her true power. The joy on Alta's face spoke for itself. No smile was needed. Later, they moved on to wooden dolls made from blocks and showed them to the villagers. Then he asked if she was ready to move them. She said yes and noted that compared to mithril they were like paper. The wooden dolls barely strained her, and Van added that the metal could interfere with maniflo. He saw that the effect of her magic depended on who created it. Alt-E at 10 years old grasped this, or was she finally beginning to accept herself? She held her breath and waited for his signal. Van announced, the dance of the mascot doll seat village will be performed by Miss Alti. The peasants gaped it moved as if alive. Some recognized doll magic, closely intertwined with murders. But Van asked them not to rush to conclusions. The doll's dance was nothing like anything they had seen before. And when Van praised Alti, her confidence soared. She controlled the dolls like a true master. Enchanted by the smooth movements of the wooden doll, the peasants fell silent. When the dance ended, Alti found herself face to face with their stunned faces. And they received thunderous applause. People went wild over these stunning movements, calling it the most beautiful dance they had ever seen, and the children asked for an encore. When they met her magic with unwavering calm, she suddenly realized how brilliant Van was. Once she feared her power, considering it dark and evil. But now, basking in praise, tears welled up. She rushed to Van, sobbing, and hugged him. His words ignited hope in her that she could love her magic. And then she lightly stroked her back, hinting that she should also perform at lunch, promising that from now on I will live in joy. He decided one thing for himself. To make Alti laugh more often, he will build a stage for her and ask for her favorite dresses so the dolls could wear them, just to see her smile. And on this wave of joy, they end the night. Meanwhile, a man appeared, buzzing with excitement near the van. Completely exhausted from overwork, Ven sat down to drink tea with Alti, and she wondered if he would ever collapse from mana overexertion. He did not, and Alti wondered if she lacked her own mana until he leaned over and whispered for her not to compare herself to Van. Mana was not visible. Those who had a connection with the elements were tested, counted how many medium or stronger spells they could create, or how long they could maintain weak ones. Some mastered all 4 elements but could only perform low-level spells. Mastering high-level ones like Panamura or Asada was rare, and Vankas created them for hours, a feat everyone considered unheard of. He waved it off, saying Asada had equaled him, but after one powerful spell he was arrested. Although the size of his mana pool was unknown, his feats in the village were impressive. Even the most powerful mage in the world would collapse after 2 hours if he did what he did. Because everyone kept talking about it, Van decided they would definitely be shocked. Sada calmly noted that they had already been like that every time. A month ago, in the capital, the king entrusted the first Prince Celio with the governance of the country for 3 months. Chilio inquired if it was about that new baron and even suggested sending someone undercover. He wondered why Prima Pilotadu was joining. Apella quickly replied that he would not allow the king to ride back alone. If he himself could not leave the capital, then his majesty would not go either, but the king insisted it was not about him. Usually he summoned people, but this lord of a tiny village could hardly leave, so he went there himself. Shilio, however, offered to lead the scouts himself, noting that neighboring countries were restless. Ready to strike at any moment, they were probably watching the border lords, those who had power. The nobility, combat squads, or mages were key. If a village of 100 people killed a dragon, it meant a lord worth meeting personally. Chelio, sharp like his father, handsome and a favorite of the people, was ready to become a great lord if properly guided. But he desired peace so much that he could not even imagine fighting rivals. Peace was a dream, but when neighboring states were building up forces and waiting for an opportunity, one hesitation could ruin them. The king knew strength was the shield of their land. Suddenly, the king realized that Pista and this new lord were the same age. Pista adored swords and horses, but was hardly interested in politics, so this lord could awaken something new in him. He decided it would be a useful lesson and took him along. Turning to Chilio, the king recalled how he himself had worked tirelessly at his age. These 3 months were to be a signal of awakening for him, so he asked Chilio to do everything possible as the temporary king. And with that, they left the capital. The king had not had such a long journey for a long time, and his heart responded with memories of youth, when he could wander freely without royal preparations. Hiding the ships that followed was impossible, so they could not blend with the crowd and watch the lives of ordinary people unnoticed. Everyone knelt at the sight of the royal coat of arms, faces to the ground. Some rose briefly, but they were quickly forced to fall again. It was logical, but the king was bored by it. He did not want to rule through fear. Losing respect could weaken his power. At the same time, fear exposed conspirators and maintained order, and punishing crimes was necessary, though boring for him, and he still could not understand how the village killed the dragon. Pistakals, look, the huge walls of the village overwhelm them. Ipella noticed that there should only be shacks here, and was wildly amazed by the incredibly fast pace of construction. The king asked what he meant, and Ipella's frank intrigue amused him. He agreed, eagerly wishing to see the fortress and uncover its secrets. The village was much livelier than the fortress. The dancing dolls of Altisiv caused a storm of applause. Children played with them, and she shone with joy. Her magic was wildly successful. Although she was helped a little, she was delighted. She trained every day, honing her subtle mastery of magic. Van rejoiced that the villagers accepted it rather than feared it. Suddenly rumors spread. An Ornish carriage was approaching. Its grandeur stood out from the fort. Some thought it was an official who came to check the dragon's subjugation. Piriel and Cusair thought it was papers about a promotion or some dungeon affairs. In the village there was a buzz of curiosity. Some were already dreaming of another barbecue after all. Van is now a baron. Van overheard and said it would be at night, and people were thrilled preparing the grill. It was still too early, but he waved it off. Otherwise, they survived on vegetables and fruits, and he noticed and confirmed the royal crest on the carriage, a signal to summon everyone. The mechanical crossbow team settles in villages at night, their place of action, the night itself. Over 100 strong. Their equipment combined wooden blocks and iron for versatility, iron shields, mithril swords, and long spears ready for anything. Ben Bryn confidently and enthusiastically greeted the representative, who willingly offered his time. When Van, now a baron, gracefully opened the gates, the first figure to appear before him was Panamera, and he simply froze in surprise. Hit him with all your might. She teased him, saying his reaction was too restrained, and asked, "Did you happen to find another one?" Van stammered, simply froze in shock, and said he had grown close to Alti. Alti jumped up and warmly greeted Panamera, and bombarding her with questions about travels. Panamera, impressed by the glow on Alti's face and in her eyes, demanded to know what Van had done, jokingly asking if he had used mind-washing magic. Van explained that Alti did not believe in her magic, so he showed her her amazing power. Penema became serious upon hearing Alti talk about her magic for. She pinched all those cheeks and exclaimed how cool it was. Then he laughed, nicknamed Van a magician, and saved the fun for later. She ordered him to bow as a baron should before his majesty. He froze, nerves twitching as King Danim approached. He couldn't believe the king was here, so far from the royal capital. But it was real. King Dano of Shura introduced himself, gladly welcomed Van into the circle of nobility, and urged him to show how his knowledge and power could enrich this land. He expected great achievements for the kingdom's growth. On his knees, Van silently watched and did not understand why the king had come. Could he lead the capital? King Dino said he had heard about Van's dungeon discovery, warned that an investment guild team would soon arrive, and Van would have to handle them completely. The report would reach him, no lies would slip through here. He enthusiastically praised how Van tamed the forest dragon at auctions. He muttered that night should have come, but strange reports required his personal visit. He interrogated Van thoroughly, and asked if he objected. Van raised his head and swore to answer honestly, but still asked the king for a promise. The king, surprised both by the denial itself and by Van's mature response, listened. Van said he would tell everything, but it might sound incredible, so he asked the king to promise to try to believe him. Apella giggled, and the king, stunned, expressed his amazement. Then he agreed to try and believe Van's story.